Chapter 2. Nazarick-style traveling experience. It could be said that there were no choke points in the great forest of Eveshah where the elves reside. There were certainly places with dangerous monsters, small nations of demi-humans, and impossible labyrinths, but no structures could be called a fortress or impassable physical barriers. However, there existed a place that could be called a choke point. It was the work of a single person. The Holocaust Scripture's vice-captain, Shon, tried looking ahead of him while he hid behind the scattered trees. There sat a girl of around 8 years old who looked even younger than her age would suggest, as elves tended to. She was sitting on a small chair on a slight incline, holding a bow too large for her. There was a quiver beside the chair with a few arrows poking it. There were fewer arrows in that slight quiver than could be counted with both hands, but they were informed beforehand that the arrows would never run out. There was no doubt that it was a magic item. No one was around except for the girl. That was what scared him. A hero could overturn the tides of battle by themselves. You could say that one of them was equal to an army of 10,000. In fact, this girl in front of him had already taken over 1,000 lives from the theocracy's army. An army of 40,000 was being nailed down by a single girl sitting on a chair. The recommended strategy in such situations was to move around the obstacle. It wasn't like they had to break through from here. The great forest itself was a natural barrier, but it was not impossible to take a detour. That said, the opponent was not an army but a single combatant. It was easy to take note of an enemy's movements if they were in large numbers, but this girl was more than just an exceptional combatant. As an individual, she would also be more mobile than their army. Once they lost sight of her, it would be hard to find her again. If an enemy capable of fighting an army alone was left to their own devices in the dark depths of the great forest, there was no need to say that the vanguard's morale would plunge. They could also try and delay her by pinning her down with a small force while letting the more enormous force advance. That was not exactly a bad idea, except for the fact that it was idiotic to divide their forces in a hostile land. So, it could be said that this was their best chance, while the opponent was deployed like this. The top brass decided that she should be dealt with while they knew her location, even if they had to sacrifice some of their forces. Only a hero could stand against a hero. Goes the aphorism. Nothing would be solved by sending in the riffraff. There were no heroes within the theocracy's invasion army this time, so it fell to the Holocaust Scripture to deal with this. But there were no heroes in the Holocaust Scripture either. There used to be one, but he was transferred to the Black Scripture. In the theocracy, anybody who stepped into the realm of heroes would be moved to the Black Scripture. Unfortunately, Shon is yet to step into that realm. Despite that, they were sent to this battlefield because it was widely believed that the Holocaust Scripture could take down a hero when they worked as a team, and that's true. The Holocaust Scripture can kill heroes. But there was a significant difference between those who just stepped into the realm of heroes and those who were nearly outliers. Even if they could win against the former, it was impossible for them to triumph against the latter. That was why Shon was observing the girl thoughtfully. Ordinary soldiers, stronger soldiers, elite soldiers, heroes, and outlier scum, who had seen beings of various levels, had enough knowledge and intelligence to measure her strength accurately and minimize their casualties as much as possible. Although not comparable to the Black Scripture, the members selected for the Holocaust Scripture were elites in their own right. He didn't want them to be killed for no reason. Depending on her strength, he might have to give the order to sacrifice some soldiers to hold her back while they waited for the Black Scripture to get dispatched from the theocracy. Shon slowly let out a slow, long breath. Though he was hiding behind the trees with invisibility and silence, silence was not originally an arcane spell, but this version was developed for use by magic casters. He still had to be mindful even when taking a breath. He wanted to wipe the sweat off his forehead, but considering any of his movements could lead to certain death, he chose not to. Shon might be a talented caster, but he was only a little better than the ordinary person at stealth without using magic. The elf girl was probably a ranger or an archer. She could sense Shone even though he was hidden by magic if it was the former. She might not know his exact location, but she could just use an area of effect attack, which she was confirmed to be able to do, to smoke him out. Shone wouldn't die from a single attack even if the opponent was a hero, but he was not confident in escaping smoothly if wounded. Even more than his fear of death, Shone feared that he might die in vain without returning the intel he collected. But she really was an unpleasant brat. She hadn't made a single move since he started observing her. Her glazed expression makes her look like a doll. But Shone knew she was a living being, not a doll. After an unknown amount of time since he started his observation, the target finally moved. Shone's heart flinched, worrying if the target found him at last. However, the target did not look at him, but that didn't mean he could let down his guard. For people who honed their skills to their limits, it was child's play to faint with their eyes. In fact, Shone knew that such a skill actually existed. With his hearing strengthened by elephant ear, he soon heard a large group of people approaching from behind. They were likely the ones his target noticed. He was sure that they were his peers, soldiers of the theocracy. Shone suddenly felt guilty because he knew why they were sent here. He would not warn them because that's what his duty demanded. Yet, he would not leave anything unobserved. That was all he could do. The target's true strength could only be understood if they saw her fight. Those soldiers were the sacrifices the top brass sent for that purpose. They were going to sacrifice the valuable lives of their comrades. Shone turned to look behind him, ensuring the target would not notice him. His eyes, strengthened by the second-tier magic Hawkeye, spotted an arrow flying over. The lone arrow bent around the trees in its path and then scattered into multiple arrows mid-air, turning into a rain of arrows covering a large area. The arrow was not probably aimed at anything specific. Even if she could locate her target through sound, this was in the middle of the forest. It was impossible to snipe accurately with all the trees around. But something like a fireball would be able to burn beyond these obstructions. She was just emulating it by combining the ability to weave through the gaps between the trees with the ability to multiply the arrows. Shone's strengthened ears picked up cries of pain from the soldiers. It seemed like no one was left unscathed. Cries? They are still alive? The soldiers milled about in confusion, fearing the arrows that came from beyond their vision. As no one managed to figure out the trajectory the arrows flew in, everyone started to run hither-thither. There was no fighting spirit left in them. They weren't exactly doing the wrong thing. In fact, it could be said they were responding correctly by scattering around randomly, which would let at least a few of them survive. The girl fired another arrow. It weaved through the spaces between trees again and then multiplied. Among the rain of arrows, the sounds of pitiful cries and trampled undergrowth gradually came to a halt. He learned one important thing as a result of the deaths of these soldiers. She couldn't kill an ordinary soldier in a single attack. Of course, considering the ability, martial art, that made the arrows multiply, it stood to reason that each arrow would have reduced precision and damage. That said, a hero could kill every one of those regular soldiers with a single attack. It could mean only one thing. She isn't a hero. That brat didn't step into the realm of heroes. That was Shone's conclusion. Because he worked hard to match his rival, the third seed of the Black Scripture, Earth, Wind and Fire, Foot, Water, he could be sure of his conclusion. She was weaker than Shone, but that didn't mean they could be at ease. The fighting styles of a magic caster and an archer are strong in their own ways. Even if he was stronger than her, the battle could still go either way. It was also possible that she hid her true strength after realizing she was under observation. But, Shone, the observer in question, could say with certainty that she didn't notice yet. There was only one thing left for them to do. Remove the obstacle in the path of the theocracy's advance. He activated silent magic wall of protection from arrows. He didn't feel like that was enough preparation, but she might notice something suspicious and escape. If he tried to do more at this distance, He can only strengthen his resolve. Silent maximized magic arrow. He came out of hiding from behind the tree and activated his abilities at the same time. He also activated the once-per-day trump card of the Arcane Devotee class that Holocaust Scripture required its members to acquire. He used it to access the spell-strengthening meta-magics he had yet to learn. Naturally, he chose triplet magic. A total of 12 magic arrows flew out at the same time. One could not escape from these arrows, but unfortunately, the damage of a single arrow was not enough. As long as there's not much difference between the opponent's and the caster's strengths, it would be hard to kill them even with maximized magic. But that was only true if he was fighting alone. All of his subordinates were observing Shon's movements with C invisibility. Their target's expression changed in an instant. Perhaps it was because she was in pain from Shon's attack, or maybe it was because she saw the 100+ magic arrows coming at her from behind Shon. Holocaust Scripture was entrusted with assassination and counterterrorism work that required them to be flexible, so their teams consisted of at least 4 members, each with different jobs. This was similar to the adventurers' tactics in the Kingdom and the Empire. As the adventurers' guilds were, in fact, created secretly by the theocracy, you could even call them brothers in arms. The tactic this time relied upon a team consisting of one common class. On top of that, only those who could use a specific skill were selected. The end result was a team of magic casters who could also use invisibility. Hit. Hit. It was like wings of light flew across the sky. The target collapsed on the ground and lay still with her face down. Even so, only Shon approached her. He didn't think the target, an archer, could use it, but some illusions could make one appear dead. He can't let his guard down yet. He put his foot under her body and flipped her around. There was not a single part of the child's body that was without wounds from being hit by their magic arrows. Shon took a closer look at her face. No light in her eyes peeked out from under her swollen eyelids. She was dead for sure. Right back at you, you shitty brat. They didn't select magic arrow just so that it could be an act of symbolic revenge. People like rangers with keen senses could sometimes sense and escape from damage if they were attacked with area of effect spells. Mental attacks were situationally effective at dealing fatal damage in a single blow, but there was a high probability that it would just get nullified. So, since he had others to back him up, he chose to use a guaranteed method to hit the opponent. Be that as it may, it was still the best spell they could have used to take revenge for the soldiers killed by her arrows. Shon wrinkled his brows at the dead child's face. He felt like there was a hint of tranquility in it. Maybe he was just mistaken, but if he wasn't, that would be extremely irritating. This elf killed nearly 1,000 of his comrades from theocracy, so he wanted her to die in painful agony, regretting her actions in the end. Shon stopped himself before he could spit on her corpse. He had to get the equipment off of her first. He planned to do it here as there were no enemies around. He would probably feel disgusted if he had to touch his own saliva in the process, so he should spit after he took them off her. First, the bow. It was an opponent's weapon who managed to stop the theocracy's army by herself. It should be something good. Good grief. Shon suddenly went stiff upon hearing the nonchalant voice of a man. Although he should have responded immediately, the suddenness shocked him to a stop. Turning to look at the source of the voice, Shon found a single elf. There wasn't supposed to be anyone here, there was no mistake about that. There should be no elves other than the target present. He even used C invisibility while approaching the target. Human, did you know? That fighting with the strong, with one's life on the line, is the fastest way to become stronger? Though I took her away from her mother and threw her into the battle immediately, thinking that she was a success, the voice sounded disappointed. The elf looked at the girl's dead body with scorn. You piece of useless shit. You are even worse than the other failures for wasting my time. As I thought, people who can't bring forth the king's essence are no different than trash. Shon already understood who the elf was. His heterochromatic eyes were clear enough proof. The final target of the theocracy. A deplorable criminal. It was the Elf King. An existence that even heroes couldn't win against, never mind Shone. Someone above even the outliers. There was no chance of victory. Silent magic invisibility. Shone panicked, immediately activated the spell, and moved a short distance. Yet, the Elf King's eyes followed him. Even though he just moved a short distance from where he cast invisibility, the Elf King clearly saw him. The moment he realized that Shone ran with his back turned to the Elf King. He can't hide the grass being trampled by him even if he was using invisibility and silence, but he couldn't stop running. Still, the Elf King didn't shift his gaze even a bit from Shone. It didn't seem like he was using invisibility to see him perfectly. He saw through invisibility and silence with just as extraordinary sight. That was why Shone had to create some distance between them. If the opponent was not using anti-stealth abilities to find him, only increasing the space between them would make it easier to hide. He regretted not using Fly to escape for just a moment, but he couldn't do it anyway because of one of the classes he acquired. Adepts of Sir Shauna had a unique ability with a limited number of daily uses. This ability allowed them to extend the effective time of a spell by consuming their mana. Taking advantage of that ability, he had already exhausted most of his mana to maintain his other spells, therefore, he did not have enough mana to effectively use Fly. Also, one would have to be mad to use Fly as it made them defenseless while within reach of the Elf King. Shone wasn't that desperate yet. It was more practical to use it after he could get far away enough and hide in the trees. He heard the Elf King scoff behind him. "It's meaningless to kill you people, but I went through all this trouble to come here, so I might as well do it to relieve my boredom." Shone wasn't exactly skilled at moving his body as a magic caster. Even so, as someone who stood at the boundary to the realm of heroes, he could cross vast distances with little effort. After Shone managed to get far enough away, the Elf King's voice suddenly echoed in his ears, which were strengthened by elephant ear. Probably Ainz as Dark Elf or Elf King himself? In this picture, he's also wearing the mask. "Go, kill everyone, Behemoth." The land shook around him. He understood that something huge had appeared without needing to look. "Disperse," he shouted, canceling silence so his voice could reach his subordinates. He had never shouted so loud in his entire life. If the Elf King grimaced a bit at this, then it's even better. He needed his subordinates to do their best now, even if it meant throwing away some people's lives as sacrifices. Getting the intel back home was the only way to recompense the lost lives. Shone, who was nearest to the Elf King, would undoubtedly die. So he turned around. If he died before his subordinates, that would be a good thing in itself. He had seen earth elementals before. They were weird chubby-looking things, smaller than humans and with arms too large for their bodies. But the one that stood before him was not such a cute thing. A misshapen body made of boulders and mineral ore and as large as the trees around it, enough to make one call it the Earth Elemental Lord, thick and long arms with stout but short legs. Maybe it would have looked comical if it was much smaller, but its arms and legs displayed power that no monster should be capable of. The Elf King stood behind it, looking at Shone's desperate struggle with a sneer. His attitude was absolutely disgusting. Someone who took lives without betting his own. Unconcerned about things like Shone's anger, the Elf King immediately closed the gap between them with graceful movements as if he was skating over the ice. The Earth Elemental, Behemoth, lifted its two giant arms into the air. "Try me, you piece of shit." Wall of stone. A stone wall was erected between the Elf King and him. In the very next moment, it was broken with a single strike, with its pieces melting away into the air. Though there were other factors, the strength and durability of a wall tended to be proportional to the caster's strength. Even so, maybe it showed that the elemental summoned by the Elf King was just that strong. Behemoth immediately lifted its left fist. Shone saw the Elf King standing there with a satisfied grin from the corner of his vision and understood what he was thinking. He knew what would happen. He probably thought that Shone would die from the next attack. He was certainly not wrong. The Behemoth's fist will reach Shone before he can cast another spell, and then he will die. Even so, I managed to buy some time. He wasted his opponent's time, even if it was only a few moments, but that is enough. It was more than enough. At least one person would survive to return to the theocracy because of this. It's a defeat for Shone, but not for the theocracy. In the next moment, Shone was turned into pulp by Behemoth's fist, with a smile on his face till the very end. The Elf King, Ainz Ooal Gown, passed through his castle gate, sighing from feeling unpleasant. It took too much time to return to the castle, which put him in a bad mood. By riding the indefatigable Behemoth, he likely returned in the fastest way possible. Even so, wasting time was a bore, and he hated the stress it gave him. Retrieving the weapons he gave to his failed creation was undoubtedly not a waste of time. He should, in fact, be praised for it. The gear he gave her were things he received from his father that no one else could make. He could not let them fall into the hands of humans who couldn't understand their value. But the problem was that no one else could complete such an important task. He didn't have underlings who he could entrust such issues with. It was because all of them were weak. All of them were useless. Elves were a splendid race. His father was proof of the fact that they were a race that could become stronger than anyone else. If Ainz was a special type of elf like a high elf or an elf lord, he would have concluded that the others were just worse, and that would be the end of it. However, that wasn't the case. His father was also just an elf. This meant any elf could become strong. That's why he couldn't understand why the others were so weak. How could he prove that elves were the greatest race? He just had to achieve something that others could see. He just had to make this world the dominion of the elves, of him who held such a revered bloodline. Of course, he required excellent, strong females for that. But he couldn't be sure which females had superior wombs until the children were nurtured. So, he sent all of his children to fight in the war, but almost none of them managed to return. He was bothered by the fact that even after doing this for such a long time, he had no results to show for it. Finally, a female approached Ainz, who looked quite menacing as he thought about various things. "My king, what is it?" He directed his simmering anger at the female and then slightly widened his eyes with surprise. A strong person's stare contained within it strong emotions, especially if it was filled with hostility or the intent to kill. As a result, it tended to break weaker beings. Yes, he didn't direct his killing intent at her, only his anger. Even so, weaker beings should still be affected, and though this female went pale, she withstood it. She was just supposed to be a weak female. In that case, how did she withstand his aura? Perhaps it was because he was exhausted. He didn't really care, but he should reward her for being able to withstand it. So, he stopped to look at her. Ainz was a merciful lord. How is that child? Who is that child supposed to be? What exactly was she thinking by asking him such meaningless questions instead of first thanking the king for his hard work after a long trip? He lost his motivation immediately. "I am asking about Rugi." Rugi didn't remember such a name. Ainz can't really remember names because there was almost no one worthy enough to be recognized by him. So from his point of view, remembering useless names was a waste of memory. It's not that his memory was limited, but there's no meaning to using his memory for unimportant things. In fact, he couldn't understand why so many people try to memorize useless things. The female shifted her gaze to the bow in Ainz's hands. So, she died. Something clicked in him. It was about that failure, the one who managed to die even though he gave her such precious weapons. He felt ashamed that half of the blood that flowed in her veins was his own. No, instead, it was because it was not more than half that she got killed by someone like humans. Yeah, she died. Is that so? Her voice trembled. She was probably feeling ashamed when remembering that her blood flowed through that failed creation, but that failure was still stronger than her. This female should be even more ashamed. But it was the king's duty to give people a chance. DMMORPG felt moved at how gentle a king he was, that he would show mercy even for the incompetent. Come to my room later. I will give you another chance. DMMORPG started walking without waiting for a reply. He should get these weapons to the treasury first. After he returned from the treasury, DMMORPG washed off the dirt from the battlefield and laid on the bed in his room. While he was waiting like that, a man came requesting his permission to enter. He couldn't see that female anywhere behind him. What is it? I have information for the king. The woman summoned by the king, named Muji, has committed suicide. Suicide? Yes. She did it by jumping from the castle. What? She died from falling from just that height. No, I forget that you people are only that strong. DMMORPG pondered for a bit. He couldn't think of a reason for her suicide. First, he had just summoned her to his bed, so she should have been joyful. Maybe it's not suicide, instead, she got murdered by someone who envied her. Are you sure that it's a suicide? Yes. We are sure, as there was someone who saw her do it. DMMORPG thought for a moment that maybe that witness was the murderer, but if it really was a suicide, what could have been the reason? Then, after he mulled it over for a while, DMMORPG finally found the answer. I see. So it's something like that. I understand now. She was sorry for giving birth to a useless daughter and killed herself as an apology, right? Only she can know her true feelings, but you are probably right, my king. The man replied with an expressionless face. In that case, give her a fitting funeral. She used her life to apologize after all. It's a king's duty to forgive others. I am grateful for my king's merciful consideration. DMMORPG nodded regally at the man who was bowing deeply. As he thought, kings should be merciful like this to useless beings. Feeling extremely compassionate, DMMORPG decided to reward the loyal man, he didn't remember his name, in front of him. Do you have any daughters? Yes. I do. You are fortunate. Send them here if they are already of age. If they aren't, your wife works too. The man looked like he was deeply moved. Then, after his body shook all over, he spoke like he was trying to squeeze the words out. Understood, my king. He left the room, and DMMORPG proceeded to forget about that female. He didn't care about what happened to some useless female. Above the great forest sprawling far south from the Sorcerer Kingdom, to the south of the theocracy, Ainz stared at the land below with the winds raging around him. So this is what they call the Great Forest. It's more like a sea of trees, yeah, the Great Sea of Trees. Due to it being nighttime and the deepness of the greenery that extended below him, it looked like it was painted black. When the winds brushed the canopy, waves rippled out just like the sea. He felt like this was the land most suitable to be called the Great Sea of Trees. In fact, this forest was larger than the Great Forest of Taub and the Azurlisha mountain range put together. It might even be larger than the entire kingdom. This is the Great Sea of Trees from now as far as the Sorcerer Kingdom is concerned. This outrageously large forest had no landmarks to speak of as far as he could see. Various species should have built independent civilizations that changed the surroundings to suit their lifestyles in this forest, but he did not find any signs of those changes from the sky. Maybe they are being hidden by the canopy. Their civilizations probably developed to hide themselves from the sky because there are monsters that can fly. But he did discover two things. One was the crescent-shaped lake that was said to be the location of the elven capital. He found it comparatively quickly due to its large size. The other one was the earthen road that extended from the theocracy. It was artificially made by clearing the forest for the advance of the theocracy's armies. It looked like a thread compared to the gigantic forest around it, but it should be over 100 meters wide. He shouldn't be able to see it from the sky if it wasn't at least that wide. He thought that was a lot of useless work, but there was probably no other way for them to establish a level of safety in this giant forest. Considering the amount of time and labor that road would have required, one could feel the theocracy's obsession with wiping out the elven country. But I can't understand it at all. Why is this the only thing that stands out? Did the theocracy stop its advance? If they wanted to destroy the elven villages, wasn't felling the trees and then creating forest fires the best way to do it? The forest was not dry, but it wasn't very humid either. So destroying the elven villages should be easy as long as they take care of their surroundings when they start the fires. They want to take the elves as slaves so they are not burning them down? In that case, it seems like the theocracy isn't that pressed. Maybe there's just that much of a difference between the strength of their forces. He didn't find any burned patches of forest from the sky, but he couldn't be sure, considering he was far above the land. Perhaps Aura would have noticed if she had been here. And that bunch of lights over there should be the theocracy's vanguard camp. Humans couldn't see in the dark, so the larger their encampment, the more likely it was bright enough to be seen from far away. But, for various reasons, especially his position in the sky, it was hard to get a good idea of the distance between the camp and the capital. He had no idea how long the army would take to reach the capital if they proceeded straightly while clearing the forest. Ainz believed he had seen all he needed, so he activated greater teleportation. It was easy to be seen from the ground if he stayed in the sky without any cover. There were many people with superior vision, so he certainly couldn't be careless even though it was night. Of course, if the other side noticed him, he could easily escape before they could climb the height of thousands of meters to reach him. Still, there was no merit in letting others know about his presence here. So, Ainz did not dispel perfect unknowable. From Ainz's analysis of the information he gathered, most of the living beings in this world were weak. Yet, he couldn't say with certainty that no one was equal to him in regions he had no information on. Therefore, he should proceed while assuming that maybe they do exist. Since the enemy could prepare countermeasures if information regarding him was leaked, a card of his revealed was a step closer to his defeat. Well then, the next should be the elven capital. Deep in the night. The forest was gloomy with very little moonlight, but that was not an issue to Ainz. He came down from the sky using it to float just above the ground so that he wouldn't step on the undergrowth, and advanced towards his target. He already understood how far the theocracy's army had gone. Next, he had to collect information in the elven royal capital. The space before him opened up gradually. Elven houses were made from short and stout trees called elf trees, and the royal capital, where many of them were gathered, looked like a forest. The construction was the same as in any other elven village, but it was especially striking when they were supposed in such large numbers. Maybe it was because they were denser in the capital, but it was overwhelming enough to pressure even him. Ainz felt like avoiding the place because it reminded him of his former gray-tinted world. So the trees were cleared around the royal capital and converted into a large grass field. That was not a natural phenomenon, but something the elves did for the capital's defense. It provided better visibility, making it harder for an enemy to approach the capital without being seen. But on the other hand, maybe this could also be considered as the elf tree's survival strategy. He initially didn't feel anything strange when he heard that the elves grew elf trees with magic, but perhaps instead, the elf trees were using the elves to multiply themselves. He could imagine elf trees as a kind of monster. He should probably investigate this more, to find out if they were intelligent. Ainz tried to see ahead of him as he thought about how to investigate this and whether or not he should entrust it to Mare. There should be guards on the lookout, surveying the coverless grasslands. It would be hard to break through without using magic. That said, it should be possible for an aura-level ranger. High-level rangers had the ability to stay hidden even if there was no cover. If the level difference between them was significant enough, it was possible for the observer to not notice anything out of place even if they met eyes with the ranger. He had heard from Aura that the stealth capabilities of a highly skilled ranger were good enough to make you think that they were nothing but a pebble by the road, but Ainz had doubts about the veracity of that claim. He had experimented on their journey here by having Aura go into hiding, but Ainz was more or less able to detect Aura when she didn't use magic items or special abilities to boost her skills. That was because Aura had her levels divided between Ranger and Beast Tamer, and because Ainz was just too high-leveled, his base stats were high. Ainz regretted not being able to personally experience what Aura talked about. Leaving that aside, Ainz was not good enough at stealth to infiltrate the royal capital without using magic. So, he cast Perfect Unknowable and turned into an elf with illusion magic on top of that. Though it would be difficult to break through his Perfect Unknowable considering the strength of an average person in this world, he still had to be careful, just like when he was flying in the sky. That was why he went as far as creating an illusion as well. He never thought for a moment that he knew everything there was to learn about this world's unique abilities and techniques. After all, Ainz's knowledge came from his time in Yggdrasil, and even that was not perfect. He should assume that the other side is using an ability all the time to see through invisibility, just like Ainz did. Ainz also wore a magic item called the Gilly Gilly Mantle as a part of his stealth setup. Despite covering himself in layers of stealth, he also prepared measures to fool the enemy in case he was discovered. One could never be too careful. Let's start then. After he reached the boundary between the forest and the grassland, there was no cover to be found further in. Ainz observed the capital. He could see elves making rounds on the bridges, connecting the outer circle of trees that made up the royal capital. They were probably equivalent to a city's walls, the bridges being the allures on said walls. He didn't know if they lacked the skills to see through his Perfect Unknowable or were just not paying attention, but the soldiers didn't act like they had noticed him. Well, he was going through all this trouble to stay hidden. It would have been embarrassing if they managed to find him so quickly. After he ensured that he wouldn't be in sight of those soldiers, Ainz took out a scroll. Then he activated the scroll. He hesitated. He started again, and hesitated. He had resolved to use it before coming here, but even so, he couldn't help but feel that it was a waste. He turned reluctant to activate the scroll every time a thought flashed by that there should be a better way. He wouldn't have hesitated if he was in a battle with his life on the line, but the fact that he wasn't in such a desperate situation was the root cause of his hesitation. After a while, Ainz succeeded in clearing his head and finally activated the scroll. He would have hesitated again if he thought about anything at all. The activated spell was God's Eye. A 9th tier spell that created an intangible and invisible eye. This was probably the first time he used this since that time with the lizard men. Its range was far greater than remote viewing, and it could also pass through obstacles like walls. While this spell was excellent for spying, you couldn't say it was the absolute best. Though it was invisible, it could easily be detected by 2nd tier detection spells. Plus, even though it was intangible, the caster would receive damage as feedback if it was destroyed in an attack. Since this was also considered divination, the opponent could find his location through anti-divination measures, or an attack could come flying over if it triggered any automated defenses. The main issue was that this eye itself didn't have any HP and wouldn't use Ainz's level or defenses. Even so, as it was far better than going over there and directly observing, it was sometimes valuable. It flew at a constant speed, but so slow that Ainz felt a bit impatient, and finally reached the city walls. 3 elf guards equipped with bows patrolled as a team, but no one noticed the approaching God's Eye. Seems like there's no one with anti-invisibility skills here, but I can't be sure that there's no one among the elves who have classes with such abilities. There was no reason for them to overlook the eye if they noticed it, so he should be correct. However, he shouldn't be careless because it was their first intel gathering mission in a previously unknown place. Ainz's God's Eye passed under the walkways and entered the capital. He immediately brought the eye back after it had just entered the city and then moved it in front of the 3 guards from before. It appeared that they were talking about something, but they still hadn't noticed the eye. It's all good, Ainz breathed a sigh of relief. Just like Nazarick, guild bases had traps that activated when invaded, weakening or nullifying certain types of magic. For example, they could break invisibility, reduce the strength of the holy element, etc. Ainz checked whether the elven city had any such traps in place. He would have to check again at the important-looking locations within the city, but it seemed like the ordinary parts of it weren't problematic. He didn't want to spend too much time maintaining perfect unknowable. Considering the mana he would be left with after this, he didn't have much leeway. Ainz gradually made the eye move into the deeper parts of the city. He wanted to find the elves that resided in trees that corresponded to shops. If he thought of it as a usual town, the shops should be clustered together in a convenient place to reach. Considering that they also had to keep inventory on hand, it wouldn't be strange if they were located in the larger trees. After a while, Ainz groaned silently. I can't find them. This city, made out of thousands of trees, was nothing but a forest to the human eye. He couldn't find anything like a signboard because it was night, and there were no nameplates on the trees. It was just rows and rows of trees without any individual characteristics that he could see. He couldn't be sure that the tree he was looking at wasn't the same tree he had seen just before. If this was a human city, there would be a thoroughfare with shops on both sides. They could also be clustered around the main square. He couldn't find any such places here at a glance. With his experience till now becoming useless, he had no choice but to search by intuition. This was a city that was not at all welcoming to a traveler. It was hard, no, it was impossible to find his target amidst this. That said, it was not like he needed to complete everything today. They shouldn't be hasty, but take it slow and safe. Even so, Ainz continued his search for a while after that. He had already activated God's Eye, so he might as well use it until it ran out of duration. But Ainz could only sigh after his long search. It's no use doing the same thing again when the residents are sleeping. He shouldn't do things without a plan. Even though it would be riskier, he should return to search in the morning. He would probably get a clue by observing the way people moved around. Ainz wasn't sure how long it would take to accomplish his goal if he didn't do that. So Ainz selected a random place and sent God's Eye in. Elves use the walkways between the trees to move around the entrances of their homes, which would correspond to the first or second floor of a human house. So he decided to infiltrate from the first floor. It was the same principle as a thief looking through drawers. Starting from the second floor would make for terrible pathing. After God's Eye passed through the wall, it flew up until it found elves sleeping on the third floor. He found a father, mother, and 2 boys sleeping there. It seemed like this house belonged to a family. I already heard about this, but how primitive. The 4 of them were sleeping soundly on a large number of leaves, collected in what was supposedly a bedroom. Human villages also used dried grass in place of a mattress, so maybe this was similar to that. According to the elves in Nazarick, this was what a regular elven bedroom looked like. Although it took a lot of work to collect a large number of leaves, they could be used for a long time without any issues. When he asked them about being bitten by insects, they replied that a spell was cast on the leaves to prevent that. After that, the children, the 2 boys, were pleasantly sleeping with slow, calm breaths. Sleep, how did it used to feel like? A long time had passed since he gained this body. This body's lack of the 3 basic needs and its insensitivity to pain was probably why he managed to not collapse till now, but he still felt some regret about it. When he sees such pleasant sleeping faces, he feels nostalgic and envious. Even more so when he sees tasty food. Good grief. Ainz shrugged and activated greater teleportation, arriving in front of a large curtain made of vines. It was not weird to see such veils made of vines in the forest, but if one looked at this curtain closely, one would find that it was skillfully hiding behind a small cottage. This had been their party's temporary base for these past few days, a green secret house created by a magic item. Fenrir, sitting beside the green secret house, slowly stood up to sniff its surroundings, letting out a growl while glaring in Ainz's direction. But his line of sight was a bit off. Like Aura back then, even Fenrir couldn't completely sense someone being hidden by perfect unknowable. Instead, it should be praised because it even managed to feel Ainz while he maintained perfect unknowable. Ainz cancelled the spell. Now that it could see Ainz, Fenrir bowed its head with a look of remorse on its face. Although it couldn't talk, Fenrir was rather intelligent. Its act of bowing its head was not the instinctual act of a beast, but clearly conveyed its apology to Ainz. But Ainz didn't think that Fenrir was at fault here. From its point of view, he had been just some unknown intruder that suddenly appeared here. This was the natural reaction of a guard protecting its master. It would have been more problematic if it hadn't responded like that. He had only brought this Fenrir with them instead of the usual Hanzos this time. Although Ainz said he would take a lot of high-level underlings with him, he did not stay true to his words for specific reasons. In the present situation, where he couldn't predict how his plan to obtain friends for the twins would work out, he didn't want to expose information to others if possible. And the other reason? He stopped allowing the Guardians to head out alone after Shaltyr's brainwashing incident. But what was the result? Even though Nazarick started being more active since then, the enemy didn't appear again. The only one who fell for the bait was a platinum-armored man named Riku Agnesia when Ainz, who was actually Pandora's actor, seemed alone. It was like the enemy who brainwashed Shaltyr didn't exist at all. That was why, since he managed to fish out Riku when there were no Hanzos around, maybe the enemy had a way to detect the presence of the Hanzos. Perhaps it's some ability of a world-class item. Or perhaps with some kind of talent. Therefore, he was performing a dangerous experiment by not bringing the Hanzos along. He informed Albedo of this reason, but even Ainz could see that there were a lot of faults in his reasoning. She was persuaded by his spiel, smiling all the while, which made him doubt if she was really convinced. Maybe he would get a talking to after he returns. Good job. Ainz left Fenrir with a curt greeting, feeling a little somber. He then put his hand on the green secret house's door, so camouflaged that one couldn't find it without knowing it was there beforehand, and pushed a little. The door didn't move. Unfortunately, as this magic item did not have a keyhole, though it could be forcibly opened by something like Epignoe, one had to request someone inside to open it once it was locked. Ainz used the door knocker. One could look out from the green secret house by making the door translucent from the inside. After a few moments, he heard the door being unlocked. And then it opened. Welcome home. The one who replied energetically was Aura. Mare slowly followed with his welcome, his eyes completely drowsy. Both of them have changed into pajamas, and Mare is wearing a nightcap. Of course, this was the correct appearance given the time. Sorry for making you both wait so late into the night, Ainz said as he entered. The space inside was filled with warm light and far larger than expected from its outer appearance. You would directly enter the living room from the door and see the kitchen and other rooms from there. There were also 4 doors that were connected to the individual rooms. No, we expected it to take more time when we were informed that you could be late. I thought so as well, but let's not talk while standing here. Let's sit over there. He wanted to tell Aura that it was fine to go to sleep. But he should still share the gathered intel with them, even though it's just a meager amount. Ainz didn't put much trust in his ability to remember, so it's better to do it as soon as possible. While feeling a bit guilty about making them go along with his selfish reasons, he invited them into the living room to talk about what he saw. Sitting on the chairs, he found Aura looking attentive, unlike Mare, who dropped his head onto the backrest with his eyes half closed. He looked like he would go to sleep any time now. Ainz felt even more guilty when he compared them to the sleeping children from before. Am I not being considerate about those who need sleep because I don't need any? This is bad. Why don't we let Mare go to bed? I won't mind if you informed him about our talk in the morning. Good grief, Aura slapped Mare's head. Wake up. You are being rude to Ainz Sama, you know? Welcome back. Mare gave a slight bow. Ainz couldn't mock that they already went through that. This kid. Aura was getting angry at Mare's attitude. It's not good to force someone to stay awake. It can affect tomorrow's opera. Ainz shut his mouth suddenly, remembering himself from his Yggdrasil days. Of course, he believed it didn't affect his office work, but was that the case? Also, it was different when you did it to entertain yourself versus when you were made to do so for others' convenience. Ainz, Suzuki Satoru used to complain when he had to stay late because of his boss. First of all, he shouldn't be comparing children to adults. Still, it could also be considered wrong to compare a child with the astounding physical ability of a level 100 NPC to an ordinary adult like Suzuki Satoru. The two of them stared at Mare, whose eyes, half closed from drowsiness, looked like he was glaring at them. Mare's head suddenly slid, causing him to panic with wide-open eyes. He then returned his head to its previous position. He was nearly at his limit. Well then. Let's do it like this. Mare can go to sleep to not affect tomorrow's work. His wits will become dull if you forcefully keep him awake, and that's not a good thing. Can you inform him in the morning about what we will talk about here like asked before? She should have immediately agreed to Ainz's orders. Instead, she made a complicated expression, probably thinking Mare's behavior was too slovenly for a guardian. However, it was just for a moment. She deeply bowed as if she had just persuaded herself in her mind. Understood. I will immediately take Mare back to his room. Can you stand? He can't even give an understandable response to Aura, so standing is out of the question. Let me carry him. Aura looked like she wanted to say something, but Ainz ignored her, stood up, and lifted Mare in his arms. Perhaps because Mare had changed into pajamas and was only minimally equipped, he found Mare relatively light. But, no, regular children probably only weighed about this much. It would have been harder if he was fully equipped, though it's not like I couldn't carry him even then. That thing is really heavy, perhaps the heaviest of all of the Guardian's equipment. Since both of his hands, he could have carried him with one hand if he wanted to, were occupied, he let Aura go before him to open the door. He entered Mare's room and let him down slowly onto the bed. He had already closed his eyes and was taking slow, calm breaths. He probably started sleeping while he was in Ainz's arms. Ainz silently exited the room, taking care not to make any sounds. Aura followed him even more silently, as expected of a ranger. Both of them returned to the living room and retook their seats. Immediately, Aura bowed her head and started speaking. Please forgive us for taking a rest while Ainz Sama is working so hard. I apologize on Mare's behalf. You'd be right to be angry and feel uneasy about his work ethic as a guardian, but let me assure you that we would usually equip items to remove our need for sleep if we have work to do at night, and you wouldn't see such a slovenly appearance from us. If you were to ask us why we didn't do so today, it's because our strength in battles would be reduced a bit, as equipping the item meant leaving out our battle-focused equipment. So we decided not to equip the item as we will be standing on guard to protect Ainz Sama, Aura quickly explained. He could feel her anxiety peeking through her uncharacteristic way of talking. No, you don't have to worry so much. We are here on vacation after all. There's nothing wrong with sleeping early. More importantly, what about you, Aura? Don't you feel sleepy? No, I would never show you such an unbecoming appearance like that, too stiff, too stiff. I am not feeling angry at all. Rather, I feel happy that I got to see a different side of Mare, you know? You people always end up being too formal in front of me. I now feel extremely curious about how others behave normally. Like say, how about Kokyudos? There's not much difference from the normal Kokyudos. Aura returned to her usual expression. I see. In that case, should I secretly have a look using perfect unknowable while he is alone? Ainz subtly smiled, although his face didn't show it, his voice probably relayed his feelings, and Aura too joined in with a smile akin to that of a pranking kid. Well then, are you sure you don't want to sleep? I am usually awake around this time, so I don't really feel that sleepy. According to her, it was common for her to stay awake late into the night to play with those of her monsters that were nocturnal. This playing seemed important for beast tamers as the monsters would build up stress and wouldn't operate at full potential if they skipped it. That said, it was not like she was reducing the time she spent sleeping. She just slept late into the day following the night she stayed awake. So, it was something similar to a night shift. By the way, if any of the twins had to head outside Nazarick, they would equip the item as mentioned earlier to skip sleep and stay alert. What should I do about this? It's natural that the persons in charge would be working hard, but shouldn't the races that need sleep be better off sleeping? Especially children who need a good rest for their growth. Maybe I should discuss it with Albedo, that aside. After taking a breath, Ainz talked about the Theocracy's camp he saw in the Great Sea of Trees, though he did not figure out their troop strength or how far away they were from reaching the elven capital. It was just enough to know their armies were still advancing. Coming to blows with the Theocracy is not a part of Ainz's present mission. Then, he started explaining the more important matter of his exploration of the elves' royal capital. He talked about everything that happened without hiding anything. There was no use in hiding such issues. He just had to be honest when something was impossible. Also, Aura was different from those two. Maybe she would take his words as they were and give him better ideas about how to proceed. Is that so? Aura, who heard his explanation, nodded slightly. In that case, we should observe them during the day, just as Ainz Sama says. I am planning to do so, but what are you two going to do during that time? About that, it's better if I don't infiltrate, right? You are right. I think there's a very low chance of you getting discovered, but we still don't have enough information to be sure. It's better not to leak who we really are in the present situation. In that case, I will talk with Mayor tomorrow about his task. But, I am planning on cooperating with Ainz Sama. How about I investigate the surroundings of that city to find any tracks left by the elves? Ainz nodded in agreement. If goods were being transported to the royal capital, they should leave some kind of trail behind, however faint. The more used paths are no different from roads. If they managed to find them, they could also expect to find places frequented by the elves, like the elven settlements at the other end of the road. Of course, all of this rested on the assumption that the elves didn't use something like Forest Walker, but Aura's idea was excellent. There wasn't a single reason for Ainz to object to it. It's a splendid idea. To search all the areas around would probably not even take a day for you. Work with Mare to search for any trails left behind by them. I'll be relying on you. Okay. Understood. In that case, I will once again conduct some intelligence gathering during noon tomorrow. Actually, it's today, considering the time. Then I will conduct the search at night because I feel like it's easier to get noticed in the day. I will leave it to you. Well then, let us go to bed as well. Good night, Aura. Okay. Good night, Ainz Sama. Ainz stood up along with Aura. He went separate ways from Aura to the room designated to him, entered it, and lay on the bed. But Ainz didn't need to sleep because he was undead. He ended up taking out a book from the item box. It was one of the books on management he had been reading a lot, titled To Become a Good Leader. To be frank, he didn't feel like reading these books was helping him, but it was probably better than not reading them at all. Ainz started turning over the pages. Ainz was in a daze for a while. He wasted 2 precious scrolls on infiltration on the first night and the noon of the second day. Only at noon on the third day did Ainz finally find vital intel. That being said, the only things he saw were the trees with shops, but this did let him get a sense of the capital's layout. It was just a tiny step for others, but a giant leap for Ainz. He was so happy that his emotional suppression was triggered. Therefore, he resolved not to waste this chance. Ainz made sure to remember the route to the shop. He retreated at that point. There was certainly still some active duration left for the spell. Although he felt extremely curious, wanting to send the god's eye over to the vast and large tree that was the royal castle and take a peek, he managed to control himself. In human civilizations, kings were not always the strongest beings around. This was probably for two reasons. One was that it would be hard for humans to prosper if they followed the strongest instead of the ones who could make better decisions. It was the survival method of a species that was nothing but prey for the other races, who were weaker than the others but also more populous. The other reason was that they occupied comparatively safer areas. That was special about the kingdom, the empire, and the Holy Kingdom. However, for the races who lived in a land that required clashing blades with other races, it was natural to have their strongest be the king. The elf king was then probably a strong person. In that case, to be careful, they should not invite meaningless danger after going through all this trouble. He had collected various pieces of information on this world until now, but he had yet to meet a strong being that could match him and wasn't a monster. Maybe if he hadn't met that mysterious warrior called Riku, he would have been careless and looked down on the elf king. Instead, meeting Riku made him more cautious than ever before. He dispersed the eye and cast greater teleportation. Ainz returned to their base and exchanged the intel he found with the two mare, with his eyes completely open this time, who had just returned earlier. He was informed that although they had wasted the second day before realizing the elves were using the trees to travel, they finally found success in finding multiple trails. It might take different amounts of time to investigate them, depending on the distance to the nearest settlement on those roads. Ainz expressed his unease about being seen by the elves using those roads if they decided to investigate them. In response, Aura said that they would travel along the road on the ground with Fenrir. She confidently proclaimed that they would not get discovered if they were inside the forest. She was so sure of her opinion that it made Ainz think his worries were unfounded. Even so, Ainz did not give his go-ahead for the moment. Instead, he requested them to wait for a while longer. He would likely be getting his hands on some good intel today. And so, on the night of the third day, Ainz approached the elven royal capital again using perfect unknowable. Naturally, he infiltrated from a different spotone he hadn't visited before. He couldn't guarantee that he didn't leave any marks behind on his previous incursions that some excellent ranger among the elves managed to notice. He always moved using fly to not leave any marks behind, but that was just from Ainz's point of view, which was a layman regarding stealth and search. He was not confident enough to proclaim that he didn't break any branches or make the leaves bend in strange directions on his way here. Honestly, I sometimes wonder why I am being so careful, but it would be bothersome if the nearby elven villages started thinking that some mysterious entity was prowling around. It would be especially troublesome if they were to be captured by Theocracy and then leak that information to them. It was doubtful that this mysterious entity would be traced back to the Sorcerer Kingdom, but letting the Theocracy know there was a third faction nearby would be bad. Also, he feared how the Theocracy would react to that intel. Their unanticipated reaction could throw his plans into disarray. It wouldn't be a bad idea to pause this now and have a discussion with Albedo and Demiurge, but if I were to do that, my plans for Aura and Mare to make friends would be disturbed. Therefore, the only option left to Ainz was to be as careful as possible. Ainz took out a scroll and quickly activated it. He didn't hesitate because he was sure there would be concrete results to show for it this time. Good. Ainz whispered after infiltrating the target's elf tree with God's eye. His target was sleeping, buried in a mountain of leaves. It was a male elf. Elves were fundamentally a slender race, shorter by about 10 to 20% compared to humans. In addition to that, they barely had any body hair and didn't grow beards. As they also looked like young adults for an extended period of their life, it was tough to estimate their age from their external appearance alone. However, most of them look far younger than their actual age. Therefore Ainz was not sure that this elf held the information he wanted, but there was a reason Ainz chose him as his target despite that. It was because the elf lives here alone. Abducting an entire family would cause trouble later, but it was easy if it was just a single person. He also had another reason, but that can only be confirmed later. As he had memorized the route, Ainz directly teleported over with greater teleportation. The elf didn't wake up at Ainz's intrusion. Instead, it was a given that he wouldn't even be able to sense Ainz unless he was a high-level ranger. Ainz then cast the 4th-tier spell Charm Species on him. The spell triggered without fail thanks to him being asleep and the large gap between their levels. "Wake up." Ainz spoke to him. His perfect unknowable was dispelled the moment he cast a spell with the intent to harm. Nevertheless, he continued to wake him while gently shaking his shoulders with his hands, careful not to cause him pain. The elf mumbled like an idiot, but it couldn't be helped as he was just woken up now. "Don't resist, okay?" Ainz ended with that and activated greater teleportation while he held the elf's hand. This spell allowed one to teleport with other people, but they had to be in agreement and not resist the teleportation. It worked here because the charm status was considered an agreement. The dominated status should also work similarly, but he didn't use this harder to resist and higher tier option because he was on guard against certain things. So this kidnapping was perfect in execution. You could even call him a first-class criminal. Good. Just like what I planned. Of course, he would be happy because his plan went so smoothly. While he had a broad smile on his bony face. What the hell? What is this? Upon seeing the sudden change in his surroundings and feeling the ground underneath him, the elf jerked up and turned completely awake. Unfortunately, he didn't look like he still thought this was a dream. Or maybe the elves didn't have the concept of a dream world in the first place. Don't make such a loud voice. Even if you told me not to, I used teleportation magic. Calm down. There's no one here who would harm you. Teleportation magic? The elf continued to panic silently. The only reason he stopped was that the charm magic was still in effect. Well, we are here. Ainz opened the half-open door and led the elf into the green secret house. Aura and Mare should observe them from the gaps of their room's slightly open doors. He also thought about letting the captive see them, who were dark elves, hoping it would make him speak more freely. But considering the troubles that this might end up causing in the future, he decided not to. Although the dark elves weren't considered enemies by the 3 captured elves, the situation could be different now. Maybe dark elves were now considered enemies in the royal capital. Of course, it wouldn't be a problem if Ainz said they are not enemies to him. What is this place? Don't tell me this is the world of the divine tree. Ainz didn't know a thing about this world of the divine tree, but he could guess it was probably something from their myths and legends. Or, perhaps, is it related to some player from Yggdrasil? There's a need to investigate, but I don't want to spend too much time here. I will do it sometime later. Ainz made him sit on a sofa in the living room and took a memo pad out. It contained a list of bullet points with the questions he needed to ask. He couldn't waste any time. If something failed in the process, he would have to kill the guy. Although it was doubtful, someone suddenly disappearing from the royal capital could still cause problems in the future. Tell this friend of yours about various things you know, in as few words as possible. Ainz continued without waiting for his reply. Is there a possibility that you will die if someone used magic or other means to get information from you? No way there's going to be anything like that on me, right? The guy looked like he had no idea what Ainz was talking about, but there was a possibility that the elf just didn't know even if there was such a trap. If I remember correctly, it took 3 questions before it was activated that time. Ainz considered such scenarios while preparing the questions in the memo, so he just needed to go through the list from top to bottom. Do you know any Dark Elf village's location? I don't know the exact place, but I do know their general location in the Great Forest. It sounded like it was further south from the royal capital. He went into more detail, saying it was in a place called the 3 Trees, where the trees were giant. But Ainz couldn't make any sense of it as he didn't know the layout of this area. So, he would have to rely on Aura, who was listening in. Continuing to the next question, when making this memo, the twins were surprised that he didn't include this question. However, now that he thought about it, it did look important, so he moved on to the third question. Tell me what you know about the theocracy. The theocracy. That horrid country of humans. Those shitheads are attacking us for no reason at all. A country without honor that attacked us while we were unaware, a bunch of wretches who kidnapped hundreds of elves. So started the guy's denunciation of the theocracy, which continued with vigor until Ainz stopped him in a fluster. But it did seem like the guy, who was only a commoner, didn't know how far the theocracy had advanced. He wasn't even sure if the elves were winning or losing. However, seeing the patrols moving in a tense mood compared to before, the common opinion among the elves was that the situation was not good. 3 questions were asked, but there was no indication of anything happening to the elf. As he thought, that time was an exception. In that case, he could ask the elf everything he wanted to hear about, but he couldn't really spend that much time with him. How are the relations between the elves and the dark elves? They aren't bad, right? Not really. I think? Before Ainz could ask him the reason for the slight pause, the elf started speaking again. I don't dislike them, and I don't think those around me have any bad feelings about the dark elves either. For us, they are like some kind of distant relatives. But this is only about how we feel, and we don't know how the other side thinks about us, you know? We rarely meet them, so I don't have a clue about what their feelings are. Do you know anything about the Sorcerer Kingdom? What's that? Instant reply. Well, he expected this, so he wasn't surprised. Anyway, he determined that nothing in the information acquired just now constituted a hindrance to the plan to make friends with the twins. That's all I wanted to ask, I am grateful. It's all good, aren't we friends? Ainz unintentionally smiled mirthlessly at the guy's reply. He was planning on making friends with others, but when the same word was pointed at him, it rang hollow. For Ainz, only his guildmates could ever be called his friends. That's it then. Mare popped his head out of the door behind the elf when Ainz sent him a signal. Ainz continued to talk with the guy to divert his attention. I also wanted to know more about things like elven culture, but I can't spend too much time on. He saw the elf's eyes become drowsy, and then he fell sideways onto the sofa. The elf was taking slow, calm breaths that marked deep sleep. This sudden turn of events was caused by Mare's Sandman's sand. Ainz maid Aura, who was following Mare, confirmed that the elf was asleep. Aura. Do you think we can reach the Dark Elf's village using what this guy said? I feel like I can, probably. But I might need to conduct a detailed recon when we are near it to find the exact location. That was good enough for him. Ainz cast control amnesia on the elf. This was the main reason why he selected an elf living alone. Since it was hard to estimate an elf's age, he couldn't be sure that he would get an adult with all the required knowledge even if he kidnapped a mature-looking elf. There was a chance the elf would end up being a very young person who never stepped outside of the royal capital. On the other hand, he could be sure if he kidnapped an elf with children, but then there would be as many untied ends as there were members in that elf's family to deal with later. If he killed them all just because it was bothersome, it would mean that an entire family would have disappeared from the capital without any signs of resistance to boot. That would indeed create problems for them. He probably couldn't make it look like they had escaped away during the night due to debt or something. And there was no way his mana could last long enough to cast control amnesia on a whole family like he was doing now. Therefore, he selected a male elf who lived alone. Ainz removed the elf's memories in a single move. Fine manipulation of memories and ensuring the details stayed consistent was complex. However, drawing them in batches without caring much for the details was not that hard at all. Plus, the memories he needed to erase didn't span across that much time. This was the reason why he tried to take as little time as possible for his questions. If he didn't need to erase the elf's memories with control amnesia, Ainz would have spent as much time as possible, maybe even until the charm ended or even longer, by recasting charm species, to question him. Since he controlled the number of questions and was done with the questioning in a short time, he easily managed to delete the memories up till the moment he went to sleep. No, he even ended up erasing a bit more to the time just before the elf went to bed. This was caused by him wiping many memories at once, but his MP probably wouldn't have lasted otherwise. Speaking in hindsight, his remaining MP actually looked like it would have held, but hindsight was hindsight. He couldn't do anything about it now, so even if the elf had some doubts, he just had to hope that the elf would reason it out by himself. His MP was low, but he was left with enough to meet the remaining tasks, because they managed to complete the task without an issue by preparing meticulously. I'm leaving then. Aura and Mare, can you lend me a hand just like we planned? Okay. Leave it to me. Yes. I will do my best. Aura and Mare held the elf's limbs, swinging him while they carried him with Ainz at their lead. Considering their strength, one would have been enough to carry the elf, but if he was hit by something and it was considered as damage, he may wake up. Then Ainz would have to cast control amnesia again, and he was not sure that his remaining MP was enough for that. Of course, Ainz first exited the green secret house by himself and activated Perfect Unknowable. He opened a gate after that. Naturally, this elf's house was on the other side of the gate. Ainz first entered the gate alone and entered the elf's bedroom. He immediately started looking around while trying to listen for any sounds. It seemed like there was no one around to be alarmed by the sudden gate. For a moment, Ainz continued to listen carefully, observing the situation. Looks like there's no problem. A ranger on Aura's level could stay silent without letting Ainz hear anything, but it was not like even someone like Aura was always doing it. It would be like some farce out of a dark comedy if a veteran ranger existed who, in this short time, managed to notice something was wrong in this house and laid in wait, expecting something to occur again. So, Ainz could only assume that it was safe. Ainz dispelled Perfect Unknowable and stuck his head into the gate to send a signal to the twins. They carried the man, swinging by his limbs, through the gate. The three of them executed their plan in silence. First, Aura and Mare carefully laid the man on his bed made of leaves. It would be too idiotic if he were to receive damage now and end up waking. Sandman's sand caused a deeper sleep than sleep. One would wake up from just a shake for sleep but wouldn't open their eyes unless they received damage if it was Sandman's sand. If they left him like this, and if no one discovered him and woke him up by causing damage to him, he would gradually die from emaciation. The uproar that would cause was not something Ainz wanted after going through all this trouble to not create any such disturbances. They started preparing to wake the guy up after letting him down on the bed. Ainz looked around the room, trying to find the object he saw when he entered it. It was a weird, at least he didn't find it ordinary wooden sculpture with a bulging stomach that looked like the cross between a mole and a frog. They didn't find such animals in the few days they spent in the forest. Maybe it was a mythical beast from elven mythology and legends. Ainz took that sculpture into his hands. As I expected, it's wood. But it's heavier than I expected. Not bad, but if it ends up killing him, well, there's nothing I can do about that. It's very unlikely they would suspect Ainz's involvement even if they started a murder investigation. Upon seeing Ainz with the sculpture, the twins carried the elf under the shelf where the sculpture was. After Ainz gave them a nod, the two went first into the gate. Ainz followed them and stopped just in front of it. He then threw the strange sculpture into the air. This was the best he could do to not cause a suspicious death that would trouble him later. Ainz immediately entered the gate without waiting for the sculpture to hit and dispelled the gate without a second thought. Good. I will go get the final confirmation. Wait for a bit, both of you. Okay. Understood. Only a little more, right? Good luck, Ainz-sama. I think it should be fine if it's Ainz-sama, but Please take care, because I think that your mana could be low." Receiving the twins' encouragement, Ainz recast Perfect Unknowable and used greater teleportation to appear in the elf's room again. Shit. That's painful. Why the hell would it fall on its own? First of all, why am I sleeping in such a place? Did I drink? I feel like I didn't. Shit, that's painful. Ainz looked at the wide-awake elf, who was taking his rage out on the shelf. He smiled at the elf, who was becoming more and more tearful from the pain. Nicely done. A perfect crime. The elf didn't look like he was acting and didn't seem to suspect anything. No, it looked like he did have suspicions about the sculpture falling on him, but he probably didn't think that some strange person came into his room and threw it on him. Wait a minute. Ainz stopped before he could activate greater teleportation as he heard the suspicion in the elf's voice. Did he notice something? Maybe not pinned on us, but still that there's an intruder? Was there some kind of monitoring equipment, magic item here, because it's a shop? I didn't find any though. Is Sungoga-sama trying to tell me something? Sungoga-sama? I don't remember any such monsters in Yggdrasil. Sungoga-sama. Sungoga-sama. Please speak if there's anything I should know. The elf kneeled on the floor, his head to the ground and the sculpture in his hands held high. That was the model pose of devotion a highly religious person would take. So it's just the native religion? That aside, why does this guy talk to himself so much? Is he intentionally doing this because he thinks that there's someone around? Or is he just simply praying to this god called Sungoga? The elf seemed to be a different person from the one they kidnapped and used. Ainz hesitated for a moment about whether or not he should kidnap the elf again and kill him, but he decided not to. For now, it was more likely that he was just praying, but it was still better to be on guard. Ainz wanted to leave something behind to monitor him if possible, but that would be difficult even for Ainz. There was no convenient spell for that. The most he could do was to use magic to check in at times. Ainz clicked his tongue, although he didn't have one, and returned to Green's secret house using greater teleportation. The twins, who were waiting for him, smiled when Ainz dispelled Perfect Unknowable and gave him a thumbs up. Honestly, he was a bit uneasy about the elf's behavior at the end, but since they couldn't do anything about it, he chose not to tell the twins if they turned uneasy. Okay, everyone. Thank you for your cooperation with everything so far. With that, today's work is done. The twins looked puzzled at Ainz's exaggerated action but immediately smiled again. As it is getting late, please turn in early so that you won't feel exhausted tomorrow. The twins replied with an energetic, okay. With that, although the day has already changed, I will now decide the time we should be waking up at. Yes, I don't mind you waking up whenever you want, but don't go sleeping until noon now, you hear? Righto. If you wake up by 9:00, I will bring you our breakfast from Nazarick. Then, they answered with a loud, okay. While Aura slightly poked Mare with her elbow, it didn't look like she was bullying him. Okay, with that, thanks for the hard work everyone. Upon hearing Ainz's words, the two of them also followed with, thanks for your hard work. Well then, that's all folks. They set off, heading towards the Dark Elf village. Relying on what that elf had said, they raced across the ground on Fenrir's back. They would have headed there without stopping if they could have discovered their target from the sky, but unfortunately, it couldn't be discovered even with Aura's talents. It was hard to breathe as they ran through the forest. It was as if Ainz were being smacked in the face by air that had absorbed the very greenery. That characteristic, and extremely potent on top of that, the scent of a forest made his nasal cavity tremble. It may have just been Ainz's imagination, but he could feel it was different from the air in the great forest of Taub. If it weren't just his imagination alone, though this world may resemble Yggdrasil, there were significant differences, and it was brimming with various other changes. As he idly mused over this, the urge of wanting to travel all over this vast world put just a little thrill in his heart. If the average Joe was to proceed down the pathless path through the great sea of trees with its dangling vines, the jumble of trees, and more impeding them, it would obviously be impossible to proceed in a straight line. Before they knew it, they would find themselves heading in a completely different direction. From what they had heard from the man, the distance to the Dark Elf village was about a week's travel. Although the elves were adapted to the forests, if they could progress 15 kilometers a day within this sea of trees, they would be doing well. Based on that, the villages would be separated by about 100 kilometers. Ainz and company covered that distance on foot for over an hour. They would have arrived even faster if it hadn't been necessary to check their surroundings. That was just how incredible Fenrir was. Fenrir's ability, Forest Walker, had been beneficial because all the trees, dense thickets, and such moved as if they were avoiding Fenrir, thus, they could travel in an approximately straight line. No matter how great Fenrir himself was, they shouldn't have been able to have come this far on foot in such a short time had it not been for Forest Walker. But, I think it's somewhere around here. Aura, who was sitting in front of Ainz, tilted her head in confusion. Since elven villages were constructed using trees, finding one in the middle of a forest was rather tricky. But, of course, this was the exact reason why their civilization developed to use trees to construct their villages. The royal capital of the elves, cut down with all its surrounding trees, was the exception. That being said, it should have been impossible for it to have been so cleverly hidden that Aura, a ranger with high-ranking abilities in her own right, couldn't find it. Since it was difficult to imagine that they had just failed to notice it on the path they took to get here, they might not have reached their target village yet. As long as we weren't mistaken about the distance to our destination, there's no problem. If anything, it would be a problem if we got too close. Ainz touched the mask he had equipped with his hand. I want us to find the village before they find us. I want information on them, so we're going to conceal ourselves somewhere we won't be found. What he was most scared of was that they had come to a completely wrong place. However, he wasn't really worried about that being the case. Of course, if one were to tell him to go into a place without a single point of reference like the Sea of Trees, without any hesitation, Ainz would absolutely not be able to do that. So the directions he got from the elf were, once you've gone about 2,500 paces, there will be a huge boulder, and from there turn in the direction where 3 trees are standing in a row, advancing around 3,000 paces. And so on. Ainz thought his explanation was less than crystal clear. But not to Aura. Indeed, there had been occasions when even Aura was confused and had to search the surrounding area, but she was still mostly confident and had guided them this far. Were rangers always this amazing, or is it just Aura who's amazing? He hadn't felt it as much when they were making their way to the Dwarven Kingdom, but this trip had led Ainz to conclude mentally that this would have been impossible without a ranger accompanying them. Even Yggdrasil had this kind of dense forest, but in hindsight, they were still adjusted for the players. He didn't think a real jungle would be this formidable. But on the flip side, it was just a fact that this experience had a certain excitement to it. Out in these backwater regions, if anything were to happen, I can totally understand that desire for the unknown. The world searchers. Explorers were those who pursued that excitement. The figure of a true adventurer that Ainz sought. Throw it all away and walk around exploring this world. Finding himself idly considering such things once again, Ainz shook his head. There was no way he could do such a thing. It was an act that would never be permitted for Ainz Ooal Gown, the supreme ruler of the great tomb of Nazarick. However, it might be allowed if it was just for a little bit. Not abandoning Nazarick, but taking a paid vacation like he was this time. Come on, I'm just thinking about the same thing over and over again. Honestly, I guess I can't claim that it doesn't come from the desire to drop this heavy baggage and run away. In the end, am I just going around in circles without any development? Am I incapable of growth because I'm an undead? Or is it because I am me? When I think about that, all I can do is sigh. Well, there's no point in thinking about unhappy things. Anyway. This time is with Aura and Mare, but how about I bring Kokyudos and Demiurge along if there's a next time? I haven't brought them along since that one time. Ainz recalled when they acquired the land ship at the Katsa Plains. Okay. Let's get rid of those pessimistic thoughts and think positively. If I were to go on the same kind of journey again, it would be pretty rough doing it without a ranger, but trying to overcome that challenge through wisdom and insight might be pretty entertaining. It was precise, because Aura was here this time, that they could make it this far in good shape, but it was a little disappointing that this meant Ainz hadn't done anything at all. Of course, he could just butt in and say he'll handle things himself. Aura would probably be considerate and step aside for him if he did. If Ainz were to make a mistake, she would surely think of something to help him while being careful not to offend him. However, oh God, anything but that. Because I already feel like I'm getting in the way of running the Sorcerer Kingdom enough as it is. Therefore, the best way to get what he wanted was to have an adventure without Aura. That way, everyone could rack their brains together and have some fun. However, it should be noted that Ainz only thought of it this way because he had confidence that his powers could pull through during an adventure. For example, if he was in some unknown place and lost his bearing, he could return from anywhere using teleport. So, for example, even if some strange magical beast came charging out of that thicket, he would be able to deal with it somehow, and even in the worst case, he could still flee back to Nazarick. Sending adventurers out into the unknown world. That in and of itself wasn't a mistake. Even Ainz, the guild master himself, endorsed it. However, it's not good to consider myself as the standard for an adventurer. Really, when I see Aura playing an active role in a place like this right before my eyes, I can feel the necessity of properly training up the adventurers. It wasn't as if Ainz particularly wanted the adventurers to die. We're conducting training in the Great Forest of Tob, but the levels of danger in the Great Forest of Tob, which was under the complete control of Nazarick, and here were wildly different. It might not be a bad idea for the adventurers to gain experience at the Great Forest of Tob and hold the final exam here, but the circumstances surrounding that would require further discussions with Mayor Ainz-sama? Sorry, Aura. It seems I got a little wrapped up in my own thoughts. So, what did you need? Well, what do we do now? Ainz looked up at the sky. He couldn't see it through the branches' green leaves, growing in abundance. However, the red-tinged sun, casting its light over the earth, was more than enough for him to know what time it was. The same as last time, we secure a place that is hard to find and separated from the activity area of the Dark Elves, or any other intelligent life, and that's where we'll stay. Understood. Well then, could you grant me a little time? Of course. Ainz replied, and Aura nimbly jumped off Fenrir. However, just as Aura looked like she was about to dash off, Ainz hurried to call for her to stop. Wait, Aura. Take Fenrir along with you. You don't need to worry about us waiting here. I'll summon a monster as a substitute for Fenrir. Right, Mayor? Yes, Ainz-sama. Mayor, who was behind Ainz, answered in a fluster. In other words, starting from Fenrir's head, Aura, Ainz, and Mayor were riding on his back in that order. Because they could sense anyone that approached them with Fenrir's powers of perception, Ainz and Mayor were highly grateful for him being there since they lacked those abilities. However, Aura would have to act alone if that was the case. It would be one thing if she had spells that summoned monsters like Ainz did, but Aura didn't have that ability. He was worried about sending her out into this unknown land without a shield. Using a magic item as a substitute was one way to deal with this, but it required one action to summon a monster. When he considered things like time limits and such, he didn't think it a good move. I think I'm worrying about it too much, but Aura will finish her job quicker by taking Fenrir along. Aura displayed an attitude like she was going to say something, but she responded, understood. And so, Ainz and Mayor dismounted, she got back on Fenrir, and then she took off. The figures of a girl and a wolf immediately disappeared into the forest's trees and became invisible. Now then, Mayor. Let's conceal ourselves in this area as inconspicuously as we can so that we won't be found. Someone finding us here would put all of Aura's hard work to waste. Yes. So then, we're going to use Green's secret house? That will be fine, but before that there's one thing we have to take care of. If Ainz were alone, Perfect Unknowable would be the most effective solution, but he couldn't cast that spell on others. On top of that, Mare couldn't use it, so they needed to take completely different measures, which was why monster summoning was mentioned earlier. Ainz took a small statue out of his inventory. It was a magic item. Statue of the magical beast Cerberus. A magic item from the same creator as the statue of the animal warhorse that he had once used before. Fully engraved right down to the bulges of the muscles, brimming with the feeling of movement, it was a magnificent piece like a work of art. When Ainz used it, it instantly swelled up, and the magical beast appeared. What appeared was, of course, Cerberus. It could bite with its 3 dog and lion-like heads, scratch with its razor-sharp claws, and bite with its poisonous snake-like tail. All its attacks could also be imbued with fire damage, and it possessed complete resistance to flame and poison. It was a giant, high-ranked magical beast with considerable combat abilities. That strength could be better understood when speaking about monsters that could be summoned through Summon Monster 10th. Although, if it were against an Ainz-class player, it would not be a tough monster for them to deal with. That said, there wasn't anything they could do about that. A summoned monster's role was to attack an enemy's weak point, trigger traps, increase the number of available moves, or simply serve as a shield. They were not meant to defeat other players on their own. Indeed, if Cerberus were continuously buffed through the use of a skill, it would be able to fight even better. For example, some of the undead Ainz summoned wore Getav strength. And yet, if you compared them to players with martial classes in the same level range, no matter how unfavorable the comparison was in terms of battle strength, so long as they were neither incredibly mismatched nor some absurd build, one-on-one, the player would rarely lose. The first reason Ainz had chosen Cerberus and not an eyeball corpse or other undead was because he had judged that a beast-type monster's sensory abilities would be higher. And one more reason was that he had concluded that a monster with exceptional senses of smell and hearing rather than vision would excel in their role as a detector in the sea of trees. Cerberus might lose to Fenrir in terms of levels, but in the end, he did have 3 heads. No doubt his sense of smell was also 3 times greater, probably. Mare said in surprise, because a magical beast he saw for the first time had appeared in front of him. But, of course, there was no way it could have been because he thought it looked strong. Come now, Cerberus. When you catch the scent of someone who is not one of us approaching, you will inform us, yes? The heads of Cerberus growled. It was a way of growling that let you feel their eagerness and confidence. Ainz, delighted by that leave-it-to-us feeling that was coming across to him, showed his proud expression to Mare, though he probably couldn't tell. Now then, from how many hundreds of meters away can you discern a scent? The Cerberus trio, or the number of heads, stopped moving. What's wrong? Shit. Hold up. Were the mood that was being transmitted and the anxiety at hundreds of meters? Also, coming across? Even if that was coming across to him, Ainz could only react to it, and it was more than plausible that the truth was entirely different. That's right. You have 3 heads. You can do better than Fenrir, right? Cerberus cutely whined and flopped over to expose his belly. Perhaps if a puppy had done it, one would appreciate its cuteness, and maybe even Ainz would have rubbed that defenseless belly. However, he was dealing with Cerberus. Bluntly speaking, it wasn't cute. It was the same with that giant body, but his looks were too grim. As Ainz stared at Cerberus, Mare fussed over him and rubbed his belly. What are you doing? While being mindful of Mare, who was rubbing his belly, Cerberus slowly got up and, with a determined expression, growled, I'll do my best. I'll do it. This is impossible. In response to Ainz's question, it seemed like 3 different sentiments were coming across. What Ainz focused on was that 1/3 of the sentiments were negative. It's fine if it's too much for you, okay? It's worse if you force yourself and fail, You can at least discern the scents around us and tell when a stranger is coming, right? Though Ainz himself had been the one to say it, he had also thought that maybe hundreds of meters were impossible after all. I can do at least that much. That's possible. I can do that. Ainz nodded at that feeling. Then get to it. Cerberus let out a howl. He sniffed at the scents around him. Incidentally, Ainz could also give these orders without speaking. It was possible to give orders to summoned monsters even if spells like silence were used. If you wanted to interfere with the connection between the summoner and the summoned, you would need the extremely niche class build known as the anti-summoner specialist. He gave orders verbally because he thought Mare wouldn't know what was happening if he and Cerberus were just staring at each other. Now then, next we will do as you said just a moment ago, Mare, let's create a green secret house and hide inside. We shouldn't be seen by anyone. Yes. Mare looked pleased that his own suggestion had been accepted. Actually, Mare's suggestion hadn't been off the mark. Neither Ainz nor Mare possessed concealment techniques that could erase the traces of their passing. Therefore, if they were to carelessly wander around, they might leave behind signs, and if an expert outdoorsman saw them, he could tell where they were at a glance. And so, they were wise not to move from this spot. Using magic like camouflage that was available to druids and rangers, to keep quiet would have been best, but unfortunately, there wasn't anyone in this place that could use that magic. Mare certainly was a druid, but in reality, he was an extremely niche type of specialized druid. His magic was geared towards mass genocide, and if he didn't turn to items for help, he should have learned barely any of the ordinary druidic magic, aside from a few buff-type spells. Given all that, then bringing out the secret greenhouse and concealing their presence by hiding inside it, making a hiding place where they wouldn't create footprints or other signs of their being there by not moving around, was the correct answer after all. Was it okay for just him to be taking it easy, even though Aura was working so hard? No, of course, even Ainz knew the expression, the right man for the job. He remembered looking it up when he heard it as one of the lines used when he had troublesome work forced on him in the past. And then he remembered Punito Mo said, a hardworking person's incompetence is the biggest pain in the ass of all. So this would be the right course of action. But, if this was just him as the Sorcerer King leaving things to the Floor Guardian under his command, then there wasn't any problem with it at all. However, for what reason had Ainz begun this trip? And the answer was, because it was a paid vacation. Moreover, he being the adult who first suggested it wasn't doing anything and forcing the kids he had taken out with him to work, the guilt he felt was enormous. Ainz became desperate and tried racking his brain, but he couldn't assist Aura with her work, and nothing came to mind about anything he should be doing here. About the only excuse he could come up with was that he was keeping Mare company. Fooling myself by saying I'm taking care of a child is just running away? That's about the only way to support Aura that I can come up with. So what do I do? Be respected for also doing the things I had to do. No, becoming an adult that carries out the bare minimum of their responsibilities? Should he force himself to accept that what he couldn't discover right now was a role for him to play? However much he thought about it, he couldn't come up with the perfect answer. So a despondent Ainz said to Mare, well then, let's wait inside the green secret house for Aura to get back. Yes. Ainz felt he had been saved just a little bit by the cheerful Mare's response. There exists a magical beast called the Ankylorsis. It looks like a bear from a distance, but if the difference is not quickly recognized, you can kiss your ass goodbye. It ranges from 2 to 3 meters in length. It has 2 pairs of, for a total of 4, forelegs and 2 hind legs. Sharp, pointed claws over 60 centimeters in length used exclusively for combat grow on 2 of the 4 forelegs, their hardness surpassing even that of steel. A long, thick tail extends from its lower back, at the end of which is a hammer-like swelling. And finally, most of its body is protected by hard armor plates that developed from scales. The power supporting that huge body is terrifying, a single attack unleashed by those hard, sharp claws and outstanding physical strength can easily bisect a person, armor and all. However, that is all you should be wary of. It is not as if it has any terrifying special abilities, nor can it employ any powerful magic. The Ankylorsis can only use the spell of fragrance, which in and of itself is not something that can be used in combat. Therefore, while it is placed in the top ranks of predators in the Sea of Trees, it is by no means the strongest species. However, there was one exception. A being over 4 meters in length, and through its physical abilities alone, could slaughter even monsters that had special abilities or could use magic. It would not be strange for someone not in the know to mistake it for a different species if they saw it. It was an Ankylorsis worthy of being called a lord. It lifted its head from the stomach of the animal that it had been gobbling up until just now and let out a low, heavy bass growl that would fill the hearts of those who heard it with terror. Long entrails spilled out from the corner of its mouth. Huffing and puffing, it expelled breath wet with blood and sniffed at the air. Its face was soaked with blood, but it could sense that there were two scents it had never smelled before. Since they were intermingling with each other, it was possibly a mating pair. Its belly was already full. It would be fine to ignore them. However, that was walking away from the discomfort. This area was its territory. There was absolutely no way it would allow someone to walk around like they owned the place. It stood up on its hind legs, and after using its claws to scratch away the bark, it rubbed its body against a tree. This was to clearly demonstrate that this was its territory, and then it walked off towards the source of the scent. Along the way, it used fragrance. Through this, it could erase its own body odor and the scent of blood that still clung to it. By doing this, the huge body of the Ankylorsis approached its prey. Capturing prey would be difficult if it didn't do that in this forest. The scent grew more assertive. There were no indications that they had noticed it. If it had been noticed, they would be acting differently. For example, standing still and searching for a sound. Or otherwise, trying to run away from there in a straight line. However, they weren't doing either of those actions. Or else, were they thinking they could win if there were two of them? It approached as quietly as possible until it was close to the scent. But unfortunately, it couldn't catch sight of its quarry that was still concealed by the trees. However, that was enough. It was always like that when it brought down prey. If it could see them, then it could be seen by them. So it never rushed until they could see each other, and while cautiously discerning the scent, it crept closer, and all at once, closing the distance in the blink of an eye, that was hunting. It arrived nearby. The scents weren't moving. Therefore, just like the usual hunts, it instantly broke into a run. Despite having a massive body, it raced through the trees like the wind blowing. Since it didn't have any handy abilities like Forest Walker, when it made this area its territory, it cut down all the trees that would interfere with its ability to easily pass through. Of course, no half-assed trees could stop its charge, but because there were times when an alert quarry had taken advantage of them to escape. It undoubtedly was overwhelmingly powerful, but it was not as if its hunts were successful every time. That was the reason it made preparations. The source of the scent was ahead of it. A little black one, and a big black one. The little one was on top of the big one. They were not a mating pair. Most likely, they were two different animals. But it wasn't that strange. There were those kinds of animals. They each helped the other one out. The wisdom of the prey to protect themselves from predators like it. For example, the one on top used some extraordinary power, and the one on the bottom ran away, that kind of thing. But if that were the case, they were both nothing more than mere food. It smiled. At this distance, they could no longer escape. The little one didn't look like it would make much of a meal, but the one below it was quite the whopper. Since its belly was full now, it should bury them in the ground to save for later. However, something was strange. It was violently stomping its feet while charging. They would notice no matter how imperceptive they were, and if they noticed, they would take some kind of action. So then why are the black ones not scared? Why are they not running away? Nearly all the animals that encountered it had those reactions. The only exceptions to speak of were members of their own race. Or are they just paralyzed with fear? It thought about it a little while it was running. The meat of prey frozen in terror was somewhat lacking. As for its preferences, the softening flesh from when the prey was only half killed and slowly dying was its favorite. The meat from prey that had given up on life after its guts had been devoured while it was still alive was the tastiest of all. It rose up and bellowed in front of the prey. This wasn't mere intimidation, this was to instill fear. Come on, go ahead and run, you might even be able to stay alive. Do something to improve the taste of your meat, please. It muttered that in its mind. At this distance, there was already no chance of escape. It was only because the success of this hunt was guaranteed that it could show them a little leeway. I've never seen one of you before. What a cute bear. The little one was yipping. Come to think of it. It remembered. I've seen things up in the trees that look like the little one lately. Ainz Ooal Gown could also climb trees, but tree climbing was their weak point due to their massive bodies. That was why when it was taking prey that was up a tree, it could only eat them after cutting down that tree and knocking them to the ground. However, at that time its belly was bulging, and because they were far away and going after them was bothersome, it let them go. However, right now, there was no need to hold back on eating them if they were on the ground. The black one on the bottom was looking this way without moving. It swung its foreleg with the large claws growing out of it. First, the one on the bottom so they can't escape. At the same time as a ding sound rang out, its foreleg grew hot and changed into intense pain. It lost its balance and, starting from its tail, fell backward. In a panic, it looked at the foreleg with extreme pain running through it. It was still there. It wasn't gone. However, it was in so much pain it was as if it couldn't move. When it looked, a long, snake-like, wriggling thing was dangling from the hand of the little one on top. Had it been attacked by that? Then it might be poison. But, on the other hand, when it was very young, it had been bitten by a giant poisonous snake, and this tingling sensation was similar to that. Okay. I'm not gonna hurt ya. I'm not gonna hurt ya. A loud bang came from a nearby tree when the little one swung its hand. The snake-like thing extending from its hand had struck the tree. The force of the impact had burst open the bark as if it had exploded inside out. I can do that much myself. And yet, chills ran through its entire body. Was this one tiny? Step by step and little by little, it began to seem frighteningly big in its eyes. It's all right, it's okay. I'm not scary. See, I'm not scary at all. While it was yipping, the little one on top separated from the big one below. It came down to the ground and closer with its forelegs spread out wide. It really was that small after all. I wondered just how much of a difference there is between it and me. I'm the predator and they're the prey, is how it's supposed to go. Then how can this one be approaching me without any fear? It was as if the quarry were a predator itself. It moved its eyes from the little one approaching it to the big one. It was watching them intently. This was also something it couldn't understand. No matter what animals encountered, they had never taken this kind of attitude. It turned tail and fled from the unfamiliar dread. When it was very young, when it parted with its mother and left the nest, it had experienced fleeing from prey far beyond its ability to handle many a time. So there was no shame in running away from things it didn't understand. However, there was something coiled around its hind leg, its field of vision spun around in circles. It was assailed by a sudden feeling of weightlessness as if it were being hauled up, and then a shock ran across its back. For some reason, I'm lying on the ground, half turned over. When it stood up, the long, snake-like thing was coiled around the hind leg that had been pulled, and that little one was holding the part beyond that. I have no idea what is happening or how, but does this mean that little one knocked me down? Me, by that littleness. I told you not to run away. The little one growled, baring its teeth. It was a sound that said, make no mistake, I'm going to eat you. Maybe it was an ambush-type predator. Did that mean the one in the tree at that time was as strong as this one? So it's no good after all. And I can't just keep Ainz waiting. Maybe it would be better to just kill it and skin it instead of capturing it. But wouldn't that be a huge waste? I could also use it for my experiments. Ainz also said that killing should be the last resort. It was staring at it. Maybe this meant that it was slow-moving. That was why it used that snake-like thing extending from its hand to capture prey. It tried tearing off the snake-like thing coiled around its leg. However, it couldn't. It was firmly dug in and wouldn't budge. In that case, it used the claws it was so proud of. There shouldn't be anything it couldn't cut with them. It was baffled. It couldn't cut it. Even though these claws had cut through everything until now, they couldn't cut. Yeah, whatever. I'm not gonna fight it. There was the sound of crunching dirt and sliding grass as its body moved. The coiled snake was being hauled in. It was steadily being dragged while leaving tracks in the ground. There was no longer any doubt. That little one possessed absurd strength. I guess it can't be helped. I don't really like doing this, but I'll try it once. I guess I'll kill ya if it doesn't work. The snake-like thing was removed from its leg. Before it could even think, I should run. A jolt of pain raced through its body. The jolts of pain came in rapid succession. Arms, legs, face, belly, tail, didn't really hurt that much. If it were going to try to cover some part of its body, it would be its back. If it twisted its body around its muzzle, it would be showered in agony. Its body was pinned down by tremendous strength when it tried to endure the pain and flee. When it looked, the big one had placed one of its legs on its back, immobilizing it. It was so powerful that it felt like it would be buried deeper and deeper into the ground. Can this really be happening? For one, let alone two, animals to appear whose power far surpasses my own. The pain continued. Each time that sound rang out, a sharp pain raced through somewhere on its body. Never ending, like the sound of rain. Around the time it had already lost the will to resist, the sound finally stopped. There wasn't any part of its body that didn't hurt. Its whole body was on fire, and it had a feeling it had swelled up to 2 or even 3 times its average size. There, now you're nice and obedient, right? I'm probably going to be eaten after this. What I've been doing until now is now being done to me in turn, that's all. Okay. Alright then, looking good. Do you know who the boss is now? Well, shall we get going then? However, although it's baring its teeth, will the little one be able to eat all of me? Or does it intend to share me with the one below it? Now that I'm the one who has given up on life, there's no doubt I will surely be tasty. Inside the green secret house, Ainz was working together with Mare. First, they lined up the food on top of an obsidian desk produced using magic. There was also warm soup, but it was put inside to keep it warm, and they planned to serve it right before they ate. Next, they prepared glasses full of ice for 3 and placed a bottle full of juice in the center of the desk. Even with the green secret house door closed, it was still perfectly ventilated. It was made so that through the work of a magical mechanism, neither sounds nor smells could leak out from the inside. However, because the protection of that magic wouldn't work when the door was opened, even though the two of them had shut themselves in here, it meant that the smell of the food would leak outside when Aura came back. Smells could be carried for a surprisingly long distance. Aura, of all people, probably wouldn't commit some blunder like returning to base without confirming the surrounding area was safe. Still, he couldn't rule out the possibility that a scent flying outside of Aura's sensory range wouldn't be noticed by someone else. In this forest, if someone with intelligence and culture caught the smell of some delicious food, they would undoubtedly find it suspicious. The dark elves didn't possess a sense of smell on par with beasts. However, it became possible in this world depending on the class build. Even if the person themselves couldn't do it, if they were using a magical beast and could communicate with it wordlessly, it would amount to the same thing. In other words, this meant that Ainz and Mare were diligently working away at something that would make Aura's work wasted. But, of course, Ainz was also fully aware of this. So, the reason the two of them were cheerfully preparing for a meal was that, even with Ainz forcing his empty skull to work at total capacity, this was the only idea he could come up with to escape his feelings of guilt in the end. Namely, it was to greet Aura with a delicious meal when she came home tired from work. But, of course, he might be getting his priorities backward by showing his appreciation with an act that would put all of Aura's perseverance to waste. That was why Ainz thought about it the other way around. Yes, they just didn't have to be found out by another person. The problem was the smell spread around the area, and someone else might be lured in, enticed by it. If that was the case, he just had to make it so the smell didn't spread. Of course, the most foolproof way was to set the table, shut the door when Aura came inside, and serve the food. But that lacked impact. That was why, when the door opened, it would be ta-da. There's the food. That feeling of surprise itself had the biggest meaning and significance. So, he had returned to Nazarick and had the head chef prepare dishes with as weak a smell as possible. On top of that, the wind elemental Mare, summoned with a magic item, sent the air around them up into the sky. All the air, including the smells, would be sent up to the tops of the trees, where it would finally start to spread. Scent particles were heavier than air. He didn't know whether it was the same in this world. For some reason, they might not come back down, and even if they did, they would have become considerably diluted by the time they reached the ground. But, when the updraft is created, the leaves will sway slightly, not to the extent that Ainz would worry about, but if some sharp-eyed person were watching from the sky, they might feel like something was out of place. However, a few days ago, when Ainz was doing high-altitude reconnaissance, ordinary birds were the only things flying in the sky, so it was probably fine not to worry. Ainz-sama. It's about time I returned this to you. Around the time the preparations were finished, Mare held out that the orb Ainz had given him a short while ago. It was a top-quality magic item he had named Elemental Gotcha. Inside the transparent, glass-like sphere were 4 lights moving around in circles. 4 times a day, you could summon and use an elemental for 1 hour. The types of elemental that could be summoned were fire, water, wind, and earth. There were also the composite elementals of fire plus earth equals magma, water plus wind equals blizzard, earth plus water equals bog, fire plus water equals hydrothermal, earth plus wind equals sandstorm, fire plus wind equals tornado, and more. Among these, the elementals of fire, water, wind, and earth could manifest as high-ranking elementals with levels in the low 40s, mid-rank elementals with levels in the mid-20s, and as lower-rank elementals with levels in the single digits. On these occasions, a single high-ranking elemental was summoned. The number of mid-rank elementals was random, but between 1 and 3 were summoned. The number of lower-rank elementals was also random, but a minimum of 3 to a maximum of 6 were summoned. The composite elementals could manifest as high-ranking elementals with levels in the mid-50s, mid-rank elementals with levels in the low 30s, and lower-rank elementals with levels in the low 10s. However, the number of composite elementals summoned in all cases was 1. Just from hearing this, you might think it sounded pretty useful, but unfortunately, the elemental summoned was chosen randomly. Moreover, getting a high-ranking elemental to appear was difficult compared to the lower-rank elementals. When it came to the higher-ranking elementals, it was on the same level as winning a shooting star ring. It was far too strategically useless to not be able to summon something that suited the opponent or situation. For example, if you summoned an earth elemental when flying in the sky, all you could do was watch it drop like a rock. In fact, they had to use the item 3 times until Mare could summon a wind elemental. No, there's no need for that. I'm giving it to you, Mare. As you are aware, the item is a little iffy, so I'd be happy if you would hold on to it for me if you don't mind. Although it would be a little different if it could summon, say, the highest-ranking elementals, defiled elementals, or holy elementals. Furthermore, it was originally restricted so that only druids could use it. If Mare doesn't have it, then its only role as an item would be decorating the treasure hall. It might be useful while your levels were low, but when it came to Ainz and Mare, it was an item that couldn't even be used as a shield. For that reason, he had initially placed it in his inventory, thinking he would give it to someone whose levels were low. Are you sure that's okay? Yeah, I don't mind. Rather than leaving it collecting dust in the treasure hall, Mare using it would be 100 times more valuable. Thank you very much. So are the elementals summoned by this considered the same as having been summoned using magic of that element? I also have an item that can summon elementals, but for those you have to cast a spell with the corresponding element, or that has it as a secondary element, before activating it. In other words, if Mare wanted to summon a flame elemental using an item, he had to use magic that had flame as a secondary element, for example, although Mare couldn't cast it, fireball, before using it. I believe the prerequisites have probably been met, but why don't we test it out once, the next time we have time to do it? Yes. Please let me do it. In the past, before he trusted them completely, he had investigated the abilities of all the NPCs, and in doing so, he had also learned about their equipment. The item that could summon elementals that Mare mentioned could certainly summon a single high-level elemental, but could only do so once every 24 hours and the summoning duration wasn't even 10 minutes. So if he were being honest, the item's value was low. There were plenty of other much more powerful items. And yet, Mare hadn't switched out that piece of equipment because Bukubukagama had given it to him. Ainz knew that this sentiment was shared among all NPCs. Despite being far better items, the NPCs would not change their own items. If they were to change them, it would just be for another piece of equipment they had been given at the beginning. Of course, if Ainz gave it to them like he did just now, they would use the item, but they had never submitted a request wanting to switch out the gear of their own accord. The only time might have been when they had combat drills, and Albedo came pleading that she wanted to borrow various things. They were all being bound. That was an extremely rude way of putting it, but those words flashed through his mind. That went for himself, too. Is something wrong? Ainz was pulled back to reality by the worried-looking Mare's expression. It seems he had been thinking about meaningless things. No, nothing, that's right, it's nothing at all. I was just thinking about how if I were Mare, how I should use this item, that's all. Sure enough, summoning an elemental in advance is about all the Cerberus on the other side of the door moved. When Ainz opened the door, Cerberus let out a growl. The three heads were pointed in a specific direction. There could be no doubt that this meant someone's coming. Ainz and Mare looked at one another. I had intended not to let any smell slip out, but, was my plan seen through? I don't think that's what it is though. Cerberus hadn't met Aura and Fenrir. Even so, it had noticed their scents that clung to Ainz and Mare, so I shouldn't react like this. The two of them looked in the direction Cerberus was glaring together. There didn't appear to be anything hiding in the trees. Mare kept a hand behind his ears, trying to hear any sounds coming from that direction. It definitely seems like something is heading this way. In other words, it's not them, is it? When Aura and Fenrir departed, they had gone making nary a sound. I'm sorry. I can't tell that much, but you're right. As Ainz Sama says, I think if it were my sister she would be coming much more quietly, but I don't think there's any chance that she would make noise on purpose just to let us know that she searched the area and that she knows there's no problem, and that she's heading back. In other words, he didn't know. Then I guess it can't be helped. I'll be going as we originally planned. Ainz activated Perfect Uncowable and gave a command for Cerberus to accompany him. Unlike when he needed to give verbal commands, mental commands wouldn't be interfered with by Perfect Unknowable. However, their positioning was important because even Cerberus couldn't see Ainz. So if they handled it poorly, it was possible he would be sent flying by Cerberus. perfect uncowable really does come in handy. It's a shame that Pandora's actor, who can transform into me, is the only one who can use it. Well, others could do it if I allowed them to use scrolls, but there are things like materials, time limits, and all sorts of other problems with that. While mumbling and grumbling in his head, Ainz walked, following Cerberus' lead. Before long, even Ainz's ears could hear the sound of grass being trampled, and he saw an enormous shadow. A bear? However, this was different from your average bear. It seemed to have 6 legs and looked like its fur was soaking wet and clinging to its body. Maybe it was some sort of magical beast with the unique ability to shoot out water? But what caught Ainz's eye more than that was Aura sitting on its back. She was holding a whip in her hand and caused the bear-type magical beast to tremble in fear when she cracked it regularly. On the side was Fenrir accompanying them. Aura didn't have that sort of magical beast under her command, right? So what the hell is going on? No, he could just ask her about it. It seems they had noticed the Cerberus and were warily looking this way. But they didn't immediately move to attack because they couldn't confirm whether it was a wild Cerberus or a Cerberus that Ainz had summoned. They seemed to be saying that if it were Ainz's servant, it should somehow have that feeling to it, or would it be different for a summoned monster? Ainz cancelled perfect unknowable. Ainz-sama. In an instant, Aura, the look of caution disappearing from her face, shouted in joy. Hey! Giddy up! Aura swung her whip at the bear that seemed somewhat reluctant to come this way. Then, letting out a scream that could only be thought of as animal abuse, the bear walked to Ainz, terrified. When Aura arrived in front of Ainz, she dismounted the bear. Welcome back, Aura. I'm back, Ainz-sama. I'm sure you have some questions, so let me answer them first. This bear-type magical beast seemed to be the boss of this area, so I placed it under my control. I used a whip to drill it into him that I'm the boss. Why did I even do such a thing? How could I tell that to Ainz-sama, right? Ainz wondered what the hell that was. To tell you the truth, I don't know just how powerful that magical beast is, but is it strong enough that the dark elves and other animals are wary of it? That's right. When you're as strong as Ainz-sama, you can't tell how strong this small fry is. Let me see, it certainly isn't that strong, but it seems to have more than enough strength to control this area as its territory. So, if it were your ordinary, average dark elf, I think they wouldn't get close because it would be dangerous. Actually, it appears nobody approaches this entire area out of fear of this guy. Therefore, I recommend making this our temporary camping area, on the point that an intruder will hardly ever appear. That's wonderful. Ainz thought. There certainly was more merit in placing it under their control than just killing it. Because it was unclear how much time they would spend searching for and observing the dark elves with this as their base. If that was the case, the surrounding area would be in an uproar if they killed the lord of the territory, and the dark elves were likely to come here to gather information. So it would be better to let it live, because they could also avoid that kind of encounter. Be that as it may, Aura. It's not as if I'm questioning your judgment, but aren't you already controlling magical beasts to the limits of your ability? There haven't been any magical beasts within Nazarick that have been released from your control due to this one being placed under your control, have there? In most cases, it was customary for them to be freed in order from oldest to newest, not when one was to choose and release magical beasts, but when they were forced to be released. It was even the same for summoned and created monsters. In Yggdrasil, there were a few examples of a warning message popping up and being able to select which one to release yourself. Everything's A-okay. Beast tamers have connections to the magical beasts placed under their control, but I don't have a connection with this one, per se. In other words, that means I haven't put them under my complete control. I just simply drilled it into him that I'm the stronger one. So I'm not using the beast tamer ability to raise its abilities either. I see, if that's the case, then we can't say it's completely safe, can we? That meant it was possible for its wild instincts to awaken and suddenly attack them. Having said that, he couldn't imagine Aura overlooking that possibility. She had probably judged that the people here wouldn't suffer the slightest injury from it. However, they had to confirm it, just in case. Ainz, wondering what level it was around, suddenly remembered his pet. By the way, which is stronger, Hamsook or this one? Aura had an apologetic look on her face. No, even if you didn't look so distressed. Can't you clearly tell just by looking that the bear-type magical beast is stronger? May I be allowed to answer you honestly? Of course. I, the master of Hamsook, have no reservations at all. Let me hear your unbiased opinion. In that case, speaking in terms of pure physical abilities, it's stronger than the old Hamsook. But Hamsook can use magic, so if you consider that much, it's difficult to predict which one would win in the event they fought. Because if magic is effective, the course of the battle will be decided instantly. On top of that, the current Hamsook even has the warrior class. If it's in an armored state, I think Hamsook would win without question. The image of the Hamsook that just lazed around sleeping appeared in Ainz's mind. And for some reason, there was a death knight next to him. He became slightly irritated. Certainly, Hamsook was classified as a pet, so Ainz didn't mind that he lazed about. You could also say he was working just by walking around with Mammon. But, on top of that, Ainz also knew that he was working hard to acquire the warrior class and other skills. And yet, it made him angry whenever he saw someone goofing off next to someone who was working hard. You don't have to go so far to stand up for Hamsook, Aura. But he swallowed those words. It was out of consideration for Aura's feelings. She would never praise Hamsook. I see, could he say anything more than I see? Ainz, who didn't want to say anything like, Hamsook's pretty amazing too, was at a loss, so he decided to ignore it and move on. So did a magical beast that strong just happen to be here? Or is it that magical beasts like this are common in the Sea of Trees? It's something I'd like to investigate thoroughly. We haven't spotted any high-level magical beasts on our route so far, have we? Yes. There may have been some that were just passing through, but I didn't see any. Perhaps if we searched, we might be able to find some, but what are we going to do? No, we won't bother with that. It's not as if we came here to find this sort of magical beast. Understood, Ainz-sama. But there's something about exploring that is a little attractive. Magical beasts like this bear haven't been found even in the great forest of Tob. Therefore, there's a high probability that plants and animals, the native medicinal plants, and things that are unique to this place, optimized for this environment, are living here. On top of that, there may be places where some kind of special phenomenon is occurring. In this world that had magic, places where unique phenomena occurred existed. Water flowed from bottom to top, a hill where a pillar of rainbow-colored light stood on the days it hailed, a desert where an enormous tornado occurred once every few decades. It seemed that these sorts of peculiar sights could be seen. That's right, could. Unfortunately, there still weren't any of those mysterious areas within the territories swallowed up by the Sorcerer Kingdom. In Yggdrasil, these places had unique effects, and rare materials and monsters could be found there. Would that rule also apply to this world? Let's take the pillar of prismatic light that dropped a rainbow stone, as if that light had solidified after it vanished, for example. This was famous as an item that aided in creating magic items. Wouldn't it be related to the strengthening of Nazarick if that kind of special region could be brought under the Sorcerer Kingdom's control? It doesn't seem likely that the elves have a thorough knowledge of the Great Sea of Trees. If that's the case, then it's just as you said, Aura. In the future our objective will be exploring this place. That's right, it may be necessary to send out adventurers. The undead that Ainz produced could not do things like discovering new species of medicinal plants. So maybe it was time for an adventuring party with an undead team of luggage bearers added on to take the stage after all. Now then, let's head back. Mare is waiting for us. Okay. Even so. Ainz-sama. This is just to confirm, but is that Cerberus something that Ainz has summoned? Yes, of course, you're exactly right. It's the monster I summoned to substitute for Fenrir. Ainz walked along with Aura. But, of course, Fenrir and Cerberus were also with them. The magical beast bear displayed an attitude that it didn't want to go, but with just one crack of Aura's whip, it mutely came along. By the way, Aura, what are you planning to do with that magical beast? Considering that it hasn't been placed completely under your control, how do you think we should deal with it? Yes. So I'd like to consult with you on this, but is it okay if I bring it back to Nazarick? Are you going to let it roam freely on the 6th floor? It was one thing if it possessed the intelligence necessary to hold a conversation like Ainz Ooal. Still, he couldn't allow a low-intelligence magical beast to roam freely. Even a magical beast around this level could probably kill the ordinary maids. If that were so, a portion of the NPCs would be barred from entering the 6th floor. And that wasn't all, there were the other plant-type monsters on the 6th floor. There was also the question of what to do about their safety. I wasn't considering going so far as to let it roam around freely, but I have been thinking I want to try placing magical beasts under my control, excluding the skills I have as a beast tamer. So I was thinking that I could use it in that experiment. If it's something like that, I really want to assist you with it, but to gain a power that was unique to this world and impossible in Yggdrasil. From the point of view of Ainz, who was thinking about increasing their own abilities that couldn't grow any further, he should have accepted Aura's proposal. However, it's not like it absolutely has to be this magical beast, does it? Something much weaker. How about starting with a magical beast that's around level 1? If it were a magical beast of that order, then the NPCs, even if the ordinary maids were attacked, could probably manage it somehow or otherwise with the strength of their equipment. That might be fine, too. Aura showed signs that she didn't accept it. If Ainz says to do it that way, then, no, I'm not saying anything like that, alright? But, I was wondering, why does it have to be that bear? Is it that you actually like bears? Suddenly, Aura looked back over her shoulder. Fen. I'm going to get mad. So was all she said in a slightly cold tone and immediately turned her head forward. Sorry about that, Ainz. It was because Fen looked like he was going to do something weird. Ainz looked back, but it didn't feel like he was about to do anything. However, that was probably because she had said something. Ainz returned his gaze and asked Aura a question. Well, don't worry about it. Now then, why that bear? Yes. It can't talk like Ainz can, but it seemed like it was fairly intelligent. Fen and the others can't talk, but they're really clever, aren't they? I don't think whether being able to talk or not is the end-all be-all of intelligence. As you would expect, the ones with a certain degree of intelligence are more suited to training. Indeed, he felt that he may or may not have a memory of seeing Fen and thinking the same thing. Suzuki Satoru lived a life unconnected with pets, but that seemed fundamentally different from the good dogs he heard about in stories. But, of course, if you just said it was because he was a magical beast, that would be the end of it. So that's why Fen sometimes listens to what Mare says. The ones with a certain degree of intelligence are more suited for training, after all. Or, you could just raise one from infancy. It would take too much time to do that, then something that matures in a short time like a dog. I don't know if that'll be useful for the training of magical beasts in that situation. To train magical beasts, it was logical to try and use them. When you considered that, you also had no choice but to accept Aura's proposal. But outside of Nazarick is fine. Look, right now, there's that place where we brought the humans from the royal capital are living, right? How about there? That's the fake Nazarick I built, right? The adventurers are using it. How about if I don't let it roam around the 6th floor, and I keep it isolated until I believe its training is completely finished? Could that be our point of compromise? Yes. Thank you very much, Ainz, for listening to my own selfish wishes. Ainz smiled at Aura with her head bowed. Not at all. Just as Albedo is conducting combat drills, that attitude of trying to improve oneself is magnificent by itself. All of you NPCs are my, Ainz Ooal Gowns, pride and joy. Aura's eyes were wide open, and she stopped moving. At that transformation, Ainz scolded himself. Had he said something he shouldn't have? He didn't have any recollection of that. No, I didn't get that feeling, but did I go and say something that made Aura feel uncomfortable from her perspective? Being Chagamasan's pride and joy itself was everything to her, and she didn't give a damn about everyone else, something like that? Or could it be that she's happy? It's not as if she's smiling. Maybe I should act anticipating the worst instead of expecting the best. But it would be even more awkward if he carelessly apologized. Therefore, Ainz only had one measure he could take. That's right. To show our appreciation for all your hard work, we've prepared a meal. I prepared it together with Mare, you know. Of course, none of us know how to cook, so all we did was carry it back from Nazarick. He glossed over the whole thing. While he continued to laugh, he took the opportunity to peek at Aura's appearance. She's not mad? It might be a forced smile, or it might be a smile of flattery, but she is smiling, right? Aura was smiling so broadly that he couldn't believe it was insincere. She might have been happy to hear that a meal had been prepared. Or maybe she was pleased with being praised by Ainz? At any rate, I need to give the NPCs a lot more praise, don't I? Ainz hardened his resolve to do so. He felt that one of the guild members had said in a voice devoid of emotion, gratitude is something that isn't transmitted to the other party if left unsaid. If you think you're transmitting it and say nothing, then before you know it your wife's discontent will accumulate outrageously. Was that Touch-san? While he desperately tried to remember, the green secret house came into view. When they were all standing in front of it, Mare, who was monitoring things from the inside, opened the door. Welcome back, sis. Yeah. I'm home. She could see a fully set dining table behind Mare. Aura's gaze raced over it. Ainz was also racked with tension. Wow, it looks so delicious. Seeing Aura's face break into a smile, Ainz was relieved. He had been a little worried she would say something like, and I was in the mood for katsudon today. While thinking that was something she would definitely never say. Also, because he rarely had the chance to share a table with someone, he worried that his pickiness about the food had become significantly dulled and crude. Yes, the head chef would be happy to hear you think so. In addition to that, I also had Fenrir's portion prepared, but they had placed an enormous, massive lump of meat, exclusively for Fenrir, on top of a stump they had prepared next to the base. It was a cow they had been raising for livestock, so fresh that it had only just been strangled, and the blood was still dripping. The dairy farm was in a place that was separated by a short distance from Nazarick, a vast plot where the cattle were primarily left to graze. The head chef said, I personally prefer the taste of grain-fed to grass-fed meat for that breed. Perhaps he had a significant influence, or other people felt the same way, but it wasn't a trendy choice of meat within Nazarick. Initially, they weren't allowed to graze, maybe we should raise them, so they become even more delicious. However, they didn't have enough manpower for that. In Irantal, among the people who had been forcefully moved to create the demi-human district, its nickname, there were hardly any people who had skills related to animal husbandry, and even if there had been, they would have gone in the direction of the frontier villages. Be that as it may, it was just someone who was fussy about the taste talking. There weren't any problems if it were a magical beast's feed. What should we do about the portion for that magical beast bear? He'll be fine even if he doesn't eat. It looks like he ate right before he ran into me. On top of that, apparently one kind of training, i.e. not giving him any food until he completely understands that I'm the boss, and obeys me. Is that so? No, well, it might certainly be exactly like that. Even for humans or other races, the ones that have been mentally pushed to the breaking point, fully obey us. They entered the green secret house while saying that and other things. You can go ahead and eat. When Aura said that before going through the door, Fenrir, who had been patiently waiting, sank his teeth into the meat. The magical beast bear just blankly watched that sight. That figure with the sagging shoulders certainly did appear human-like, and just like Aura said, it made you feel like it possessed some intelligence. Incidentally, Cerberus didn't need dinner. Even if you gave a summoned monster food, it would be pointless. It wasn't as if there weren't any cases when they were strengthened by giving them food that granted buffs, but at least right now, Ainz didn't feel an ounce of necessity to do that sort of thing. You serious? Bullying is not cool. So hungry. Having decided that, Ainz had a hunch those were the reactions to his decision coming back from the Cerberus, but it was probably just his imagination. The three of them arrived at the table Ainz had prepared. Go on and eat. The two of them said, thank you for this meal. In unison. Naturally, Ainz was not able to eat. Aura was the first one to eat. Ainz-sama. This is delicious. Mare nodded in agreement with his sister's words. Ainz smiled at the two of them. That's great. I'll pass it along to the head chef. I want you two to listen to what I have to say while you're eating, but we know from Aura's investigation that we'll be fine even if we build a temporary base in this area. Therefore, we will choose a place to relocate the Green Secret House, and after that's finished I want us to take action in order to find the Dark Elf Village. The two of them stopped eating and earnestly listened to what Ainz had to say. Well, even Suzuki Satoru would have stopped eating if his boss started talking about something job-related. After that, we will establish friendly relations with the Dark Elves. As our plan to carry that out, so long as Aura permits it, I want to carry out mission, Red Ogre cried. Ainz grinned. He had once carried it out with his friends, who had dubbed it a dirty trick. In truth, when he was thinking about using a monster he had summoned himself, Aura brought back just the proper magical beast for the job. If she approved to use it, there would be no other hand to play as magnificent as this one. Not being under her complete control was an element of uncertainty in the plan, but conversely, that would also increase the realism. He didn't know whether it differed by the individual or by their race, but there was no uniformity in the acting ability of monsters. The evil Lord of Wrath had given an outstanding performance, but according to Shizu, it seemed that the Circlet Demon was a damn ham. He had wanted to conceal their identities and strength, but wouldn't it be better if they could just slip right in? If it were fine to spend however many years on it, there might have been a much more different way to go about it, but when he considered the theocracy, he didn't think they had that much time. Cried because of sadness? Or cried as in shouting? Ainz-sama, just what is this plan? Ainz once more grinned at the curious Aura. At one time, it was one of the many things he had learned from his friends. The strategy's name seemed to be based on something, but Ainz acted like he knew without actually knowing. But he could explain that strategy if he based his explanation on his real experiences with it. Ainz opened his mouth. It's the Red Oni who cried, right? I read that book recently. Being the first time he learned the source of the strategy's name, Ainz closed his mouth and slowly looked up at the sky. If he had seen a majestic blue sky here, Ainz's mind, its own ignorance beaten into it by a child, might have also learned a thing or two. He might have received the consolation that he was small compared to the entire world. However, all he saw was the ceiling of the Green Secret House. After he had stared at the unremarkable ceiling for a bit, he turned his face to see Mare's pure and innocent smile. The possibility still remained that Mare was jumping to the wrong conclusion. Is that right? You're something else, Mare. I've never read that book before. You say it's called The Red Oni Who Cried. Yes. So the contents of that book are, what we're going to use that bear that my sister brought back to do, right? Oh yeah, probably, that's a bull's eye. You sure are amazing, Mare, and so, Ainz showed the two of them a smile. End of the second chapter. If you like my content, join me on Patreon, where you can find more and exclusive novels. Also, you can leave a donation by clicking the Super Thanks button. Thank you very much for your support.